Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement: this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 176: The Out-of-Control Wandering Ball. The game is paused. Malfoy seems to have broken his leg. Lee stood in the commentary box, looking somewhat smug. Even without him saying it, everyone knew Malfoy had broken his leg. After all, a normal human leg can't possibly be twisted behind the head. But honestly, getting injured on the field isn't anything to be alarmed about. In a game where even deaths are common, a broken leg is even less so. That's right, even in the Hogwarts Quidditch League, a low-intensity competition, people have died. Of course, it was a defense against the dark arts professor who was watching the game when he was hit on the head by a running ball and died instantly. Quidditch is relatively safe. The highest mortality rate is in the cauldron balancing game. Each player straps a cauldron to their head with a belt, then flies on a broomstick more than 30 meters above the ground, catching falling stones with a cauldron on their head. The one who catches the most wins. Concussions are commonplace in this game. After breaking his leg, Malfoy lay on the ground howling loudly, like a pig being slaughtered. Pansy rushed towards the arena, tears streaming down her face. What if she broke some vital parts? What would she do then? The good news was that the professors were all heading towards Malfoy. The bad news was that the one leading the way was Lockhart. He dashed towards Malfoy, ready to demonstrate his superb medical skills. It's just a broken leg, right? Such a minor injury, he'd aggravate, treat it. Just as everyone's attention was on Malfoy, the ball tumbled through the air and suddenly flew towards the Gryffindor stands. Harry was sitting in his chair, watching Malfoy from afar, wanting to see how he was doing. He suddenly heard a whooshing sound, abruptly looked up, and saw a ball crashing down from the sky like a cannonball. Harry was stunned for 2 seconds before reacting, his body jerking backward while simultaneously spreading his legs. The ball crashed down, its speed so great that it smashed through the seat, creating a large hole. Harry, who had narrowly escaped a fatal blow, was terrified. Had he been even slightly slower, at least one of his two heads would have been severed. Who could be so ruthless? Harry didn't have time to think, because the walking ball emerged from the hole and flew towards him again. Harry ducked abruptly, and the walking ball grazed his back, tearing his robes. Luckily, it was just a scratch. But Ron, who was still watching the field, wasn't so lucky. The walking ball slammed into his stomach, causing Ron to arch in pain and fly backward with a thud. "Ron!" Harry shouted, trying to chase after him, but the walking ball changed direction again, flying straight towards him. Harry quickly ducked to avoid it. This time, his roommate Dean Thomas was hit, struck in the buttocks. Seamus Finnegan should have been injured. Seeing the walking ball, in his haste, he pulled Dean in front of him. What a fair-weather friend. Everyone ran to the sides, some students even jumping off the stands to get away from the blink ball. The rush caused a stampede. Ginny, in her run, stepped on something soft and nearly twisted her ankle. The little girl cried out, "Who's there?" Luna, who was holding the quibbler nearby, warned, "Your brother." Ginny quickly lifted her foot, thinking it was George or Fred, but when she looked down and saw it was Ron, she breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, 2 more students ran up, and with a crack, broke one of Ron's ribs. Harry had cleared a large space around him. He wanted to run too, but the blink ball seemed to have him wrapped around, turning and crashing down on him again and again. "Someone save me," Harry cried for help. The professors, checking Malfoy's injuries on the field, were completely oblivious to the sudden commotion. George found an iron rod from somewhere and hurled the blink into the air. Like a booby dart, it spun back and aimed straight for Harry's head. Fred raised his wand, intending to shatter the blink with magic, but accidentally deflected it towards the young wizards. Sherry and Hermione, standing on the edge of the crowd, saw the blink fly straight towards them, but neither girl dodged. Because there were other students behind them. They both gripped their wands tightly, but luckily, Ralph, who had already sensed the commotion, appeared on his flying broomstick like an arrow shot from a fully drawn bow, instantly appearing before them. As the boy landed, the rain poured down, gathering in front of him into a water sphere almost as tall as a person. The blink was trapped inside the water sphere. Ralph turned his head slightly and asked softly, "Are you two alright?" Sherry and Hermione both shook their heads. "That's good." Ralph raised his arm, grabbed the water balloon, and with a slight squeeze of his hooked fingers, the balloon, along with a blink, exploded. The students who witnessed this were all somewhat horrified. Ralph ignored their astonished gazes, simply glancing around. A little distance away, a house elf hiding in the shadows immediately apparated away. Ralph narrowed his eyes. The suddenly out-of-control blink disrupted the rhythm of the Quidditch match, injuring several Gryffindor students. Anyone with eyes could see that the blink was aimed at Harry, but as the victim, he, thanks to his excellent movement, wasn't seriously injured. The most seriously injured was Ron. He was first hit in the chest by the blink, sent flying, and then had his ribs broken in the trampling. One can only say, don't get too close to people with great luck. He's the boy who lived, and you're not. Getting too close is practically suicide. In comparison, Cedric catching the golden snitch and helping Hufflepuff defeat Slytherin seemed insignificant. Cedric catching the golden snitch was inevitable because Malfoy was injured. According to Quidditch rules, no substitute can be brought in when one side is injured. Yes, Quidditch rules are that bizarre, no substitutes are allowed, and even with one player missing, it's 6 against 7. Given Malfoy's injury, he wouldn't be back anytime soon, and without a seeker, no one in Slytherin could catch the golden snitch. But nobody cared about the outcome of the match, everyone's attention was focused on the out-of-control blink. Ralph knew it was the house elf Dobby who did it, and the boy suddenly realized a problem he had overlooked. Why didn't he catch Dobby? As a house elf, he usually hid in the corners of the house and had a high probability of overhearing his master's conversations. Just like Dobby knew the Room of Secrets would open, Ralph didn't believe Malfoy told him, so it could only be from eavesdropping. Therefore, Dobby most likely knows who has the diary. Chapter 177 Shirley, I'm not a child anymore. Footsteps echoed along the cobblestone path. A girl with a neat ponytail walked briskly forward, wearing a sky-blue apron to prevent her robes from getting dirty while working. At the end of the path lay a turquoise lake, beside which stood a newly built wooden house, surrounded by lush, verdant reeds. Sherry suddenly stopped. In the middle of the path, a flat, palm-sized tortoise, dragging its family across, had scurried back into the lake upon hearing the footsteps. Sherry rummaged in the pocket of her blue apron, pulled out a handful of food, and scattered it on the shore, whereupon the tortoises quietly surfaced. The girl didn't seem to mind. She continued towards the wooden house, pushed open the door, and saw a pile of bubbling cauldrons. On the shelves on both walls were various magical materials and bottled potions. The room was filled with many items, yet it was impeccably clean, without a trace of clutter. Ralph sat beside the cauldron, a flame flickering in his palm as he roasted several dragon scale fruits. To the boy's right lay an old textbook, Advanced Potions Making, its margins filled with dense notes. The conventional way to process dragon scale fruits was to slice them open along the spine with a knife, but the hard, dragon scale-like shell made it easy to injure one's hand. Snape, however, had improved upon this method in his notes, proposing a fire roasting method. First sear the fruit in a flame for 30 seconds, then it would be much easier to cut through with a knife. Ralph found this method ingenious and became quite absorbed in it. After a moment, he looked up and noticed that Sherry had entered the room some time earlier and was sitting in a chair nearby, her chin resting on her hand, quietly watching him process the dragon scale fruits. Seeing the boy look up, Sherry said, "Ralph, Fawkes just arrived. He came to freeload again, and he brought a book with him." The girl pulled a thick potions book from the large pocket of her apron. After taking the book, Ralph examined Shirley's apron. The collar and cuffs were embroidered with magical creatures like the Niffler, exquisitely detailed. There were also a dozen small pockets sewn onto the sides, each seemingly neatly categorized by Shirley. Ralph recognized several items: sunflower seeds, freeze-dried fruit, a Niffler wand, bandages, blood tonics, and a quill pen. A jumble of odds and ends, like a treasure trove, quite intriguing. Ralph reached into the girl's pockets, wanting to see what else was inside. Unfortunately, Shirley slapped away the boy's restless hand, raising her pale chin and smiling. "What do you want? To see what's in your pockets?" Ralph honestly replied. "No way." The girl with the ponytail unusually refused Ralph's request. She tilted her head and blinked, saying, "Who told you not to wear the work clothes I sewed for you when you were brewing potions? Pink work clothes, embroidered with flowers? Is that what I wear?" Ralph rolled his eyes at her. Sherry widened her eyes, feigning surprise. "When I sewed them for you, you could do whatever you wanted, so you sewed them into women's clothes," Ralph said with a half smile. "Hermione made you do it, didn't she? Don't deny it. She was whispering in your ear while you were sewing. Hermione's got a lot of bad ideas now. All she thinks about is how to beat me, and you're following her bad example, aren't you?" "No, really," Sherry said innocently. "Hermione just wanted me to teach her how to knit a scarf." Ralph smiled without saying anything. He had wanted Sherry to wear a maid outfit, but she hadn't expected her to beat him to it and make him wear women's clothes. The son-in-law, ugh, the little helper had backfired. Ralph picked up the book Powerful Potions and casually flipped through it. The book detailed the recipes and ingredients for many potions, and included chilling illustrations: a witch with many arms sprouting from her head, a man spitting out large amounts of black blood, and a group of people transforming into other people. Sherry peered in and said, "This book looks dangerous." "Yes, the potions described in it aren't in our textbooks," Ralph said softly. "This book is always kept in the library's restricted section. Students aren't allowed to borrow it." "Why would Fox give you a book like this?" Sherry frowned. "I wrote to Dumbledore to ask for it," Ralph said calmly, flipping back to the table of contents. "Last year, I took you guys to the library to catch bookworms, and Professor Dumbledore caught us. The headmaster told me not to go to the forbidden section and take books without permission, and that if I wanted a book, I could write to him." Ralph needed the book Powerful Potions, so he tried writing to Dumbledore, and to his surprise, Dumbledore actually had Fox deliver it without asking for his specific purpose. Of course, since Ralph dared to write to ask for it, it meant he was open and above board. Although this was more troublesome, it avoided a lot of unnecessary trouble, at least preventing Dumbledore from misunderstanding him or developing any interest in him. "What kind of potion do you want to brew that requires a forbidden book?" Sherry asked curiously. "I need to brew a veritable potion." Ralph found the root of the word veritable potion and continued, "I want to capture a house elf, but it probably won't answer my questions. The veritable potion will come in handy, so I'll brew it first." Even if he could capture Dobby, because of the magical constraints, he wouldn't tell Ralph who Malfoy had placed the diary on. At this point, he would have to resort to some illegal means. However, Ralph had never brewed a veritable potion before. It was a very difficult potion to make. Fortunately, he had the bonus of Snape's potions talent, so he could try it himself. Soundbird feathers, Sri Lankan vulture bile, Berkshire grass, Hafir grass sprouts, Icelandic Uris stalactite, ferret heart tendon, salamander serum, Indian incense powder. Sherry read the veritable potion recipe in a soft, sweet voice, frowning as she said, "Our medicine storeroom is missing several ingredients." "That's right," Ralph nodded. Of all the materials, the feathers of the silent bird were actually the hardest to obtain, but fortunately, the bird was in the box, making it the easiest to acquire. "I need to go to the Forbidden Forest," Ralph said, gazing at the potions book. "I can replenish a lot of materials there." Sherry looked up at Ralph, her eyes sparkling, and asked expectantly, "Do you need me to go to the Forbidden Forest with you?" Ralph looked the girl up and down, finally shaking his head. "You're too young. Wait until you're older." Sherry gazed into the boy's azure eyes, pursed her lips, and said, "I'm already a second-year student, not young anymore." Ralph suddenly reached out and gently tapped the girl's forehead with his finger, smiling. "Next time." "For sure, you always say that." Sherry rubbed her forehead in annoyance, then bit her lip tightly. Ralph held the back of his head with both hands, swaying back and forth in the chair. He smiled and said, "Then grow up quickly. Thanks to book friend 20200804190621236 inches. Just love to wade through water, and 203 Damon for their generous donations." Chapter 178 Ralph, you are the most dangerous creature in the Forbidden Forest. On a dark and windy night, it was time for a nighttime stroll through the Forbidden Forest. As a future magizoologist with extensive experience in nighttime exploration, Ralph entered the Forbidden Forest as easily as entering his own backyard. Therefore, after Hogwarts fell silent, he changed into his dragon skin armor, binoculars, gas mask, and a whole host of other professional gear. Alone, with a broom and a chest, he headed straight for the Forbidden Forest. Before leaving Hogwarts, the boy even made a point of looking around the castle, surprisingly finding not a single student out at night. This time of day was usually peak for young wizards sneaking into the kitchen for midnight snacks, but after several raids, no one dared to venture out at night anymore. They all stayed obediently in their dormitories to sleep. One could say that, in a way, Tom Riddle had indeed upheld the students' strict adherence to school rules and their dedication to studying. Considering that Voldemort in the original timeline always only caused trouble at the end of the semester, probably to avoid interfering with the young wizard's studies, Ralph was truly heartbroken. Riding his flying broomstick, the boy quickly crossed the meadow. Passing Hagrid's little cabin, he saw a toothbrush. It was happily wagging its tail, rummaging through a bucket of moonfox droppings, fertilizer Hagrid had collected for his vegetable garden. Ralph stayed close to the ground, accelerating towards toothbrush. Before it could react, he kicked it in the rear, nearly sending its sprawling face first into the dirt. Toothbrush turned and saw Ralph, barking wildly at him, but stopped at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, displaying its inherent cowardice. Toothbrush was about to turn back to continue its midnight snack when Hagrid, awakened, pushed open the door and barked at the Forbidden Forest. Through the dense forest, Ralph expertly began searching for the herbs needed to concoct the truth potion. The Forbidden Forest is a treasure trove, but to enter it without leaving empty-handed requires two things: experience and a map. Experience goes without saying. The Forbidden Forest is far too dangerous. Without sufficient experience, even a small insect bite could be fatal. Without a clear map, searching for what you need in this vast forest is like finding a needle in a haystack. Fortunately, Rove possessed the Scamander family's ancestral map. Although it hadn't been updated in a long time and many parts were incorrect, most of the information was still reliable. Hovering over a spot with a clear view, Rove spread out the map, gazed into the distance at the forest, then looked down at the map again. He immediately flew northeast, stopping at the confluence of two streams, and finally found a large patch of half-ear grass sprouts swaying in the wind on the riverbank. Rove didn't pick them all. Sustainable, albeit limited, harvest was the correct way to explore the Forbidden Forest. Just then, a sudden gust of wind arose, and Ralph, riding his flying broomstick, felt a burning pain as the wind lashed his cheeks. When the wind subsided, he flew off in the direction it had come from. This sudden, eerie wind didn't seem to be naturally occurring, reminding Ralph of the scene last year when he encountered Voldemort, and Dumbledore summoned a great wind to blow away the fiend fire curse. He weaved through the forest, soon seeing many ancient trees snapped in half. Ralph landed in the devastated ruins, touching the broken sections of the tree trunks, neat and smooth, as if sawn open. Just then, a centaur emerged, with red hair and a beard, a shiny brown-red body, and a long red tail. The red centaur, seeing the boy, paused, then said, "Ralph, long time no see. I didn't expect to see you here," but Ralph continued examining the broken sections, ignoring him. The centaur approached Ronan cautiously and asked, "Ronan, why haven't you been coming to the Forbidden Forest lately?" The boy looked up, seemingly only then noticing the centaur. He exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, isn't this Mr. Ronan? What are you doing here? Were you talking to me just now?" "Ronan, don't be like that, it's my fault." Ronan uneasily stamped his hoof, looking apologetic. "You asked me to find the habitat of the gas frogs, and I couldn't find it, so I asked Nymeria for help. Her divination is the best among us centaurs, but I didn't expect Nymeria to be waiting for you at the gas frog's habitat." Ronan's expression was cold, but his words were still relatively gentle. "Then why didn't you tell me that Nymeria divined the location of the gas frogs? Or did you say it was divined by one of your tribe's elders?" "Nymeria forbade me from telling anyone I had contact with her," Ronan said with a wry smile. "I didn't dare to say anything either, afraid that Bane would hear. If he found out that I secretly helped his fiancée escape, he would definitely kill me." Ronan remained silent. Seeing the boy's pale face, Ronan quickly said, "Ronan, please forgive me this time. I swear in Bane's name, if I were to lie to you even slightly, Bane would run away from the wedding if he had a new fiancée." "Then you might as well swear on your fiancée." Ronan rolled his eyes. "I don't have a fiancée, do I?" Ronan chuckled. "So, Nymeria isn't dead yet?" "Not yet, but it's not easy," Ronan said somewhat awkwardly. "If she hadn't tamed Hagrid's dog, she would probably have been captured by the tribe." "Hagrid's dog?" Ronan narrowed his eyes. He immediately thought of Axe, then the three-headed dog. "Fluffy. Fluffy is also in the Forbidden Forest." Ronan nodded. "Yes, during your holiday, That three-headed dog was brought in and kept in a valley. Then, a few days later, it was kidnapped by Nymeria and has been following her ever since. Fluffy betrayed them? Rob remembered he still had a 100% success rate in taming Cerberus, the reward being a Cerberus seal, which would allow him to grow 3 heads. And what happened here? Rob pointed to the ravaged ground. A winged bird did this, Ronan explained. A winged bird? Yes, I don't know where it came from, but it built its nest in the Forbidden Forest. It's very aggressive and has already injured quite a few centaurs. Rob's face lit up. Winged birds were very special magical creatures. They could inflate themselves like balloons by inhaling air and could also exhale air to launch air cannon attacks. He hadn't expected to encounter a lone winged bird in the Forbidden Forest. By the way, Rob, what are you doing in the Forbidden Forest? Ronan asked curiously. I'm looking for some magical materials, Rob said softly. What are you looking for? I'll help you find it, for free this time, Ronan quickly added. Rob pulled out a piece of parchment with ingredients listed and handed it to Ronan. I'm currently looking for the Flaminida, a hallucinogenic mushroom. Ronan shook his head. That's a bit troublesome. What's wrong? The Flaminida's habitat has been taken over by a group of giant spiders, Ronan said with a worried expression. Rob exclaimed, rubbing his hands excitedly. Giant spiders, you should have said so earlier. That would be double happiness. Giant spiders are very dangerous, Ronan warned. We centaurs generally don't approach their colonies. It's alright, Rob waved his hand. Haven't you heard the saying? What saying? Basilisks are the mortal enemies of giant spiders. Ronan looked at Rob with a slight tremor. This kid even has basilisks. You're the most dangerous creature in the Forbidden Forest, aren't you? Chapter 179. Am I Spider-Man? Rolf, do you really have a basilisk? Ronan, the centaur, asked somewhat uneasily as they ran through the dense forest. He hadn't wanted to venture deep into the territory of the giant spider clan, but the gas frog incident had put Rolf in a difficult position, and he had to make amends this time, or they'd lose their friend. Ronan still cherished Rolf as his wizard friend, even though he was still young, just a pony. But the giant spiders were too dangerous and extremely volatile. As highly intelligent creatures capable of communicating with wizards, why were they classified as animals back then? The reason was that the giant spiders couldn't overcome their ferocious nature. If something really happened, Rolf could simply fly away on his broomstick, but Ronan's 4 hooves couldn't fly. Rolf sat on his broomstick, holding Nico's alchemy book, an oil lamp hanging beside him, looking quite dashing. I really do have a basilisk, it's in the box, he said calmly. That's good, Ronan breathed a sigh of relief. He thought for a moment and continued, when you summon the basilisk later, remind me to close my eyes beforehand, otherwise I'll get caught too. No need to close your eyes. Rob turned a page of his book. Why? Anyone who makes eye contact with a basilisk will die instantly, Ronan asked, puzzled. I've also read your grandfather's book, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Oh, I forgot to tell you, my basilisk accidentally went blind. Who did that? I did it. Good heavens. Then why don't you hurry up and run away, taking a blind basilisk to the 8-eyed spider's lair to die? Ronan, you underestimate the 8-eyed spider's fear of basilisks, Rob said calmly. They'll run away as soon as they smell the basilisk's scent. Whether it's blind or not is secondary. This fear is ingrained in the 8-eyed spider's genes, just like people's fear of snakes. Many people, even if they know a snake is non-venomous, dare not approach it. Like Hagrid's Aragog, who was so terrified he dared not utter the name of the basilisk. Besides, Rob also possessed basilisk magic, making him a natural enemy of the 8-eyed giant spider. But Ronan was still terrified. He was about to persuade Rob to turn back when he lost his footing and fell into a deep pit. Ronan didn't fall to the bottom of the pit, but rather onto layers of spider webs. He struggled, but the webs were very sticky, tightening with each struggle, binding him tightly. Watch out, Ronan shouted. This is a trap dug by the 8-eyed giant spider. Without Ronan's warning, Rob had already flown higher, avoiding the spider webs falling from the trees. How he caught a centaur, a great harvest tonight. I haven't eaten a centaur yet. Time for an extra meal. After a loud clicking sound, a giant spider, pulling on thin white silk, slid down from the top of the tree. It was an 8-eyed spider with 8 long, thin legs and 8 eyes. Below its eyes were huge chelicerae, and at the ends of the chelicerae were 2 long, venomous fangs. Rob, save me, Ronan shouted. How? There's another wizard, The eight-eyed spider looked up and saw the boy riding the flying broomstick, but it suddenly quickly shifted its gaze to the ground. A group of vines emerged from the ground, wrapping around its 8 legs and pulling it forward and in all directions. Rav, riding his flying broomstick, spun and landed in the air, finally leaping down onto the eight-eyed spider's back and stomping heavily on its head. "Take me to your lair, and I'll spare your life. What do you say? Save me." This time it was the eight-eyed spider frantically calling for help. Rav didn't hold back either. He raised his arm, and all the vines, under his control, stretched out in all directions. The giant spider's legs were torn and bleeding from the vines. It let out a desperate, dying roar, crying, "Don't kill me. I'll lead the way. Sorry, I gave you a chance, but you were useless." Ralph spread his fingers, and the vines lashed out in all directions. A series of tearing and snapping sounds came from the giant spider's thighs and back as it struggled desperately. The giant spider, which had intended to devour Ralph and Ronan, was instantly torn apart and collapsed to the ground. Blood splattered all over Ronan's face. Ralph didn't ride his flying broom. Instead, he flew upwards, the magic of the sprite soaring flight allowing him to fly. Ralph reached the top of the tree, where another giant spider was still perched, trying to escape. The boy beckoned, and a branch tilted slightly downwards, aiming at the spider's eyes. "And you? Lead the way, or die with it." The giant eight-eyed spider swallowed hard. "Lead the way, you could have just agreed earlier. I'm usually easygoing." The giant eight-eyed spider glanced down at its recently deceased companion, then at the branch that was about to pierce its eye, and ultimately didn't dare to object. Rav plummeted downwards, slowing down only when he was almost at the ground. The boy snapped his fingers, and a vine reached out towards Ronan, freeing him from the spider web. Rav even picked up a piece of spider silk from the ground, pinched it lightly between his thumb and forefinger, and after a few seconds, his fingers stuck together like superglue. Such strong adhesion, that's why they say giant eight-eyed spiders are dangerous. Ronan emerged from the pit, wiping the blood from his face on the tree trunk, still shaken. There are many of their traps in the Forbidden Forest. Once you're entangled in their silk, it's almost impossible to escape. "Nice magical material," Rav chuckled. "The giant eight-eyed spider is indeed a treasure trove. Its silk can be used as a magical material, and even a pint of its venom can sell for hundreds of gallons. However, these animals are inherently ferocious, and ordinary people find them difficult to deal with." Rove took out a small bottle and instructed the leading giant eight-eyed spider to secrete venom as it headed towards the spider's habitat. Ronan, the overseer, had just been caught in a trap and nearly died in the spider's belly. He now harbored great resentment towards the giant eight-eyed spider and was diligently supervising it. After running for more than 10 minutes, the giant eight-eyed spider reached the edge of a wide depression. The trees in the depression had been cleared, turning it into the spider's territory. The giant eight-eyed spider scurried down the steep slope towards the center of the depression, which was teeming with giant spiders, over 100 of them, each as large as a small car, a truly terrifying sight. The giant eight-eyed spider's companions gathered around it, excitedly snapping their large pincers at the sight of Rove and Ronan. "Caught a centaur and a wizard. Not bad." The giant eight-eyed spider was also shouting loudly, making the spider under Rove's rear tremble with fear. Was it crazy? "Aragog!" The giant eight-eyed spider yelled, "Aragog, someone's coming for you." From the center of the depression, a hemispherical spiderweb slowly emerged, and a giant eight-eyed spider the size of a peck. Suddenly, a ding sounded in Rove's brain. One domesticated giant eight-eyed spider detected, triggering side quest 1, capture Aragog, reward magic, spider sense, increases the ability to sense danger through a tingling sensation in the back of the head and adrenaline secretion. The intensity of pain triggered by the spider senses increases with the severity of the danger. However, the spider senses will not trigger on people or objects that the user perceives as not threatening. Side quest 2. Help Aragog treat his cataracts and glaucoma. Reward, magic, cocooning silk, consumes magic to create spider silk with high strength and stickiness. Side quest 3. Complete 100% taming of Aragog. Reward, magic, venomous sting, can secrete venom similar to that of the eight-eyed giant spider. Quest incomplete. Chapter 180 Aragog, please come back to the box with me. A person's destiny, of course, depends on their own efforts, but also on the system's rewards. Rolf had absolutely no idea how an ordinary little wizard like himself could possibly become Spider-Man. But if you mention this, he wouldn't be sleepy anymore. Being able to make spider silk? What nonsense about cataracts and glaucoma, he had to get those treated. Aragog slowly walked over. As the ancestor of all the eight-eyed giant spiders in the Forbidden Forest, he was now 50 years old. According to the average lifespan of the eight-eyed giant spiders, Aragog was also old, with only a few years left to live. Therefore, although its size was enormous, the largest of all spiders, its speed was extremely slow, almost shuffling. "What happened?" Aragog asked, staring with its white-tinted eyes. "I'm Hagrid's friend." Ralph jumped off the eight-eyed giant spider, which immediately scurried back to its swarm. Hagrid's friend, Aragog pondered silently. Because of the secret chamber, it had been placed deep within the Forbidden Forest by Hagrid 50 years ago, and almost no humans knew of its relationship with Hagrid. Since the other party could recognize Hagrid's name, they were probably, truly friends. "Hagrid's friend, what brings you here?" Aragog asked. "I'm looking for the fly amanita, also known as the hallucinogenic mushroom," Ralph described in detail. "It's a bright red herb that causes hallucinations when ingested." "Oh, you mean this?" Aragog spat out a thin thread, which coiled like a tongue around a piece of dead wood, on which grew a row of bright red mushrooms. "This is it." Ralph gave a harmless smile, rambling on as usual. "Thank you so much. No wonder Hagrid praised you as the kind spider." "Kind?" Aragog chuckled. "Hagrid's friend, if you want it, you'll have to trade something." "What?" Ralph asked, looking up. "Simple, your life," Aragog suddenly shouted. This was echoed by a large group of spiders on the hollow, who cackled, eager to feast. Ronan was extremely nervous, gripping his bow and arrow tightly. He hadn't found his fiancée yet, hadn't tasted the sweetness of love. He couldn't die here. But all the giant spiders surrounded him, forming a solid, towering wall of steel to prevent their escape. "We are Hagrid's friends," Ronan repeated weakly. "So, my children and I won't harm Hagrid, but I can't stop others from enjoying their free flesh." Aragog couldn't help but laugh. "Humans are so naive. Isn't it just exchanging lives?" Rob scoffed. "I thought it was some kind of difficult request." "Oh, I think you haven't understood what I mean," Aragog said softly. "I mean, of course I understand," Rob interrupted directly, opening the box and hissing in a Parselmouth's voice, "Come out." Basilisk. The box shook, and the giant spiders sensed the danger beforehand, smelling a suppressed aura from their bloodlines. The eyes of the giant spiders were filled with undisguised fear and panic. They scattered and clattered as they ran outside. Soon, a colossal creature emerged from the box. Upon seeing the enormous basilisk, the spiders ran even faster. "They're willing to trade their lives," Ronan said, pulling out his wand. "Aren't you going to do it, Ronan?" Ronan became excited. His usually gentle nature was replaced by a rare, sinister grin. He picked up the giant bow on his back, swiftly drew an arrow from the quiver, and fired with all his might. The sharp arrow pierced the spider's body precisely, pinning it to the ground. Some spiders, still attached to Aragog, charged straight at them like trucks. Ronan made no unnecessary movements. His eyes were filled with magic. He said in a deep voice, petrifying gaze, "The spiders had 8 eyes that couldn't close." Facing Ronan's gaze, they had no way to avoid it, and lay stiffly on the ground. Rolf drew a sharp longsword forged by centaurs from Ronan's waist. He walked towards the petrified 8-eyed spider, slashing down and severing half of its head. The boy, carrying the bloodied spider's head, walked straight to Aragog. He plunged the sword into the ground beside him and threw the head at Aragog, scattering blood everywhere. Rolf said softly, "You're willing to pay with your life? Is that enough? If not, I'll kill some more. It won't take much trouble." Aragog gasped. Though blind, it could sense the basilisk's presence and the frantic flight of its offspring. "Enough. I'll give you as many as you want," Aragog hurriedly said. "Make the basilisk stop. Stop harming my children. See? I told you it wasn't hard to discuss." Rolf smiled, extending a foot and stepping on Aragog's head, then wiping the dirt off its face with the sole of his shoe. "By the way, there's something else I want to discuss with you." "What is it?" Aragog's voice trembled. Ralph smiled gently, squinted at the moonlight, and slowly said, "I'd like to invite you to stay in my trunk for a few days." Ralph smiled brightly, his voice light. "Don't misunderstand, I just want to treat your eyes, Aragog. I'm not a butcher, I won't kill you." Aragog sniffed the bloody smell in the air. "Then who are you?" "A veterinarian." Ralph put Aragog and the basilisk into the trunk, and of course, he didn't leave the corpses of the 8-eyed spiders behind. These were all treasures. They could easily fetch hundreds or thousands of gallons worth. A little extra money, and he could easily scrape together Sherry's entire year's salary. Of course, when facing his little assistant, poverty still had to be acknowledged. Ralph also dug up a lot of Fly-Amanita mushrooms. He had really gone to great lengths to gather the ingredients for Veritaserum. He should have just stolen from Snape's medicine storeroom. Ralph parted ways with Ronan. He was preparing to go back to school to sleep, but as he passed a fork in the road, suddenly the hairs on his body stood on end. Capturing Aragog grants the magical ability Spider Sense, which enhances the ability to sense danger through a tingling sensation in the back of the head and an adrenaline rush. Unexpectedly, Ralph put this spell to use immediately. "Who's there?" Ralph raised his wand, pointing it at the bushes. "Come out quickly." A moment later, a female centaur emerged, visibly surprised to have been discovered. Ralph sized up the tall Nymeria. He had to admit, Bane's fiancée was truly beautiful, possessing a wild beauty. The only drawback was that centaurs typically didn't wear clothes, yet she was wrapped in a mesh garment woven from vines, accentuating her full, juicy breasts. "You were waiting for me here?" Ralph asked. "I divined it myself. It has nothing to do with Ronan this time," Nymeria quickly explained. "Oh, I know. I figured it out by observing the stars." Rove glanced sideways at Melia's bulging figure, then looked up at the sky and said, "The moon is indeed big and white tonight." Nymeria, as Bane's fiancée, was actually quite young and naive. Failing to grasp the underlying meaning, she retorted, "It has nothing to do with astrology. We observe the heavens to predict the overall fate of a species or a people. The vast universe doesn't reveal trivial personal matters." Nymeria said softly, "I divined that you would pass through here using other methods. After considering this for so long, don't you still want to make a deal with me?" After a brief silence, Rove suddenly spoke. "Speaking of which, I do have something I want to ask." Nymeria smiled. Luo Fu closed his eyes, pondered for a moment, and said, "Help me divine the location of a diary. Thanks to the 3 generous donors just love to wander in the water. Book friend 20220730120102416 inches, and book friend 20200804190621236 inches for their generous donations." Chapter 181 The Locked Room Escape Case. Divination, as a very special kind of magic, is not only passed down among muggles and wizards, but also exists among some highly intelligent species such as mermaids. However, few races value divination as much as the centaurs, to the point that almost everyone is a master diviner. Besides hunting, their daily activities consist mostly of walking on the ground and gazing at the stars, contemplating the vastness of the universe and the infinity of space and time. Rolf had always been curious about the centaurs' methods of observation. After all, given their small tribe and limited industrial capabilities, it was impossible for them to build high-precision telescopes. Did they rely entirely on naked-eye observation? Rolf had never been to a centaur tribe and couldn't know the details, but the centaurs' obsession with divination must mean they had their own unique methods. For example, Nymeria could divine the location of Vaswa's habitat and predict that Rolf would pass through. At least it proved she wasn't as prone to exaggeration as Trelawney. As payment, Rolf needed to give Nymeria a batch of potions, including but not limited to hemostatics and antidotes. There are herbs in the Forbidden Forest, but their effects are certainly not as good as potions, and there's a chance of encountering centaur tribes. It's better to trade with Rolf. As this is their first transaction, it's definitely not a one-off deal, but rather a series of transactions. A long-term cooperation is needed. Nymeria's asking price was reasonable, not exorbitant, and Rolf readily agreed without haggling. It was a mutually satisfactory deal. Nymeria immediately lit a campfire, the roaring flames illuminating her wild face. She began to chant, the large fruits beneath her vine-woven clothing swaying back and forth, gleaming with a milky white luster. She tossed sage and mallow into the fire, instantly releasing a rich herbal aroma, smoke rising straight into the sky. As the smoke gradually rose, the chanting subsided, and Nymeria closed her eyes. Only the crackling of the campfire filled the air. Rolf, with his blue eyes, observed Nymeria, quietly awaiting the prophecy. Nymeria suddenly opened her eyes. Rolf raised an eyebrow, somewhat excitedly asking, "You figured it out?" No." Rolf was speechless. You'd gone to all that chanting and bonfire, making it all so ritualistic and exciting, and he'd practically taken his pants off, only to get a nothing. You described Tom Riddle's diary, but I couldn't see its location through the smoke, Nymeria said softly. There's a powerful force obscuring the diary's position, a powerful force, a profound anti-prophecy magic, Nymeria whispered. Some wizards, not wanting their things to be divined by prophets, choose to cast this protective spell. Many cemeteries have it too, to prevent wizards from stealing them. I see. Ralph narrowed his eyes. He had no knowledge of divination and truly didn't understand the taboos. So, who exactly is this Tom Riddle? Nymeria asked curiously. Does it matter who he is? Of course. Nymeria hesitated for a moment, then said softly, as long as it doesn't involve any powerful wizards, my predictions are usually quite accurate. But if it does, it's easy to suffer a backlash. Famous prophets in history generally died young because they could divine things beyond their capabilities. Nymeria seemed afraid that Ralph wouldn't believe her. So she stared intently at him and said, I'm not lying to you. All right, Tom Riddle is Voldemort, Ralph said frankly. Even though Nymeria was in the Centaur tribe, she knew who Voldemort was. Then it doesn't count as the diary anymore. Can you divine for me who attacked Filch? Ralph hesitated. This is Filch's heir. This time, it definitely doesn't involve any powerful wizards, since the diary couldn't tell. Divining who attacked Filch would still lead to the diary. Nymeria threw the hair into the fire. The dim flames licked the gray sky, and black smoke rose, churning and twisting. Nymeria continued her chanting, her body swaying gracefully. Putting everything else aside, her performance alone was worth the ticket price. The flames quickly died down, and Nymeria suddenly spoke. If you're quick, you can see that person in a room on the second floor of Hogwarts Castle. Nymeria quickly drew a diagram of the location on the ground. This direct answer surprised Ralph. Centaurs like turn things with tonight's XX was XX, even the cryptic oracle field was more straightforward than them. He hadn't expected Nymeria to be so direct. Ralph leaped onto his flying broomstick, his voice urgent, I'll bring the potion. With that, he rode his broomstick in a beautiful arc through the air, heading towards Hogwarts. Nymeria watched the boy's figure disappear before wiping the sweat from her chest. Her first and proper deal with a wizard, she was a little nervous. Ralph soared through the air at incredible speed, reaching Hogwarts Castle from the depths of the Forbidden Forest in just 5 minutes. But as he neared his destination, he abruptly slowed down. The noise of his flying broomstick at high speed was too loud. Hermione had been woken up last time and seen him from her dormitory window. Ralph, of course, wanted to learn from that experience. Indeed, nighttime adventures are honed through experience. Ralph entered the castle with practiced ease and, following Nymeria's directions, ran towards the second floor. Knowing Hogwarts as he did, it seemed to be not far from the school hospital, the washrooms. Ralph's steps became even lighter, and he became completely invisible, his presence completely concealed. As he approached the washrooms, his heart skipped a beat. Food was scattered on the ground. It seemed someone had gone to the school hospital and been dragged into the washrooms. Reaching the washroom door, the Botricle had already jumped onto the doorknob and opened the locked wooden door. Instead of hiding to the side, Ralph stood right there at the toilet doorway, truly audacious. A short wizard, dressed in a long black robe, his face completely obscured, crouched beside a witch, Mrs. Pants. Mrs. Pants had suffered similar torment as Filch. Black smoke billowed from her wounds. The black-robed wizard held a bottle, collecting the black substance. Seeing the door suddenly flung open, the black-robed wizard, on high alert, raised his wand, but not pointing it at the doorway, but at the wall beside him. A flash of red light, followed by a deafening roar, and the wall collapsed, sending rubble hurtling towards Mrs. Pants on the ground. A normal wizard's first reaction would be to attack the wizard who opened the door. But the black-robed wizard was clearly more cautious. He didn't care who the intruder was, his priority was escape, so his first choice was to blow up the wall. Whoever it was, they were certainly an enemy. Not a friend, and wouldn't let Mrs. Pants be crushed to death by the rubble. He was attacking where they had to defend. The bathroom pipes burst, the water that had been heading towards the black-robed wizard was forced to change direction, instead covering Mrs. Pants. The wizard in black prepared to leave through the collapsed wall, but another column of water rose, forming a wall of water that blocked his path. The wizard turned and ran deeper into the washroom, disappearing into a cubicle, a move that startled Ralph. He continued to control the water flow, sealing off the surrounding walls and creating a perfect secret chamber. After moving the rubble aside, Ralph bent down and picked up the bottle the wizard hadn't had time to take. It was filled with a black substance. Just then, a flame appeared in the washroom, followed by a deep red bird that materialized out of thin air, clutching an old man in its claws. Clearly, the explosion had alerted Dumbledore. Ralph put the bottle in his pocket before slowly revealing himself. Dumbledore hadn't expected to see Ralph here and was about to ask when the boy urgently said, "Professor, someone attacked Mrs. Pants." "That person just entered a cubicle and hasn't left yet." Dumbledore's face was grave. He raised his wand and gently waved it. The wooden planks of the cubicle vanished. Ralph frowned. Because, the cubicle was completely empty. Chapter 182 Lockhart, who among you will duel me? Early in the morning, Ralph left his dormitory and headed to the Great Hall, where he sat at the Hufflepuff table. Hermione, carrying her school bag, arrived at the Great Hall and, seeing the boy's figure, rubbed her eyes in disbelief, almost thinking she hadn't woken up yet. It was the first time she'd ever seen Ralph arrive so early. Hermione walked towards the Hufflepuff table, asking curiously, "Ralph, why are you up so early?" "I didn't sleep at all last night, I was busy all night," Ralph said, pouring himself a potion to wake him up. "Where have you been?" Hermione sat down, glaring at Ralph with a look of someone looking at a habitual offender. "Out all night again." Ralph didn't answer, but simply took a sip of the potion and said softly, "Someone was attacked last night." "Who was attacked?" Hermione looked astonished. "Keep your voice down," Ralph said in a low voice, then beckoned to Sherry, who had also just arrived at the Great Hall. Ralph quickly recounted the events of the previous night, including his deal with Nymeria. Last night, in the headmaster's office, he had just as frankly told Dumbledore what had happened. There was nothing he couldn't say. In fact, he had to explain why he was in the bathroom. Ralph didn't want to be suspected of being the attacker, and often misunderstandings arise from inexplicable concealment. Of course, he omitted the matter of Aragog the Eight-Eyed Spider and the Veritaserum. Such trivial matters didn't need to be mentioned. After listening, Hermione remained silent for a long time. The amount of information was too much for her to process. Sherry was alright. She knew Ralph had gone to the Forbidden Forest last night and knew about the centaur, but the attack on Mrs. Pants was truly unexpected. Ralph wet his fingers and drew a picture of the washroom on the table. "It's strange. I sealed the washroom with magic, an absolute locked room, yet the black-clad wizard could disappear. Could it be an illusion charm?" Sherry guessed. "Or an invisibility cloak?" Professor Dumbledore was also in the washroom. Neither of those things would escape his notice. Ralph shook his head. Besides, the cubicles are so small. Even if he were invisible, where could he hide? It couldn't be apparition either. Hermione frowned. "There's an anti-apparition charm in the school that can prevent wizards from leaving. According to you, it really is an absolute locked room. That person couldn't possibly have escaped." "Hermione, it's not entirely like that." Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Phoenixes, house elves, even dwarf birds can operate in this school. Their magic is different from that of wizards." "You mean, that person might have been rescued by a house elf?" Hermione raised an eyebrow. "It's not impossible," Ralph pondered. "If it really was a house elf, the range of students possessing the diary would need to shift slightly. After all, house elves are practically unheard of in ordinary wizarding families. Surely it couldn't be Draco Malfoy who possessed the diary, could it? But that's unlikely. No matter how ruthless Lucius is, he wouldn't let his precious son take such a risk." Ralph sighed softly. Seeing the boy seemed somewhat downcast, Sherry placed a hand on his shoulder and said gently, "Ralph, don't blame yourself. It's a pity the Black Wizard escaped, but not catching him isn't your fault. You did very well. Besides, you saved Mrs. Pants." Hermione also racked her brains for words to comfort him. As for going to the Forbidden Forest, well, there was no other way. The boy looked up at the two of them and grinned. "I know." The news of Mrs. Pants's attack and her lying in the school hospital spread throughout Hogwarts by morning, and the young wizards, who had been somewhat relaxed, tensed up again. Everyone was puzzled. Usually, it was the defense against the dark arts professor who got injured. Why the sudden change this year? Many students believed Lockhart might have secretly cast a spell, transferring the bad luck to someone else. Therefore, many students hoped he would suffer bad luck quickly so the bad luck could be transferred back. Girls would always go to the restroom hand in hand in groups after class. The boys followed suit, forming small groups of 3 or 5, holding hands and crowding together. Suddenly, Someone spread the rumor that Mrs. Pants had gone to the school hospital to visit Filch that night before being attacked. Suddenly, everyone was debating whether Filch and Mrs. Pants had a secret relationship. Plus, Weasley had been attacked, wasn't he Potter's boyfriend? No? Then why were the two always inseparable? The young wizards immediately found a common thread among the victims: they all had partners. So the rumors grew increasingly outrageous, evolving into a story of a wizard wielding a giant side of death, dressed entirely in black, who was extremely jealous of couples enjoying happiness in love and would attack them upon discovery. Suddenly, countless couples were forced to break up, not because they chose to, but because single wizards, for the safety of their partners, advised them to break up. In the end, a righteous organization nicknamed the FFF Group by Ralph Roosevelt suddenly appeared within Hogwarts. This farce also affected the professors, but after searching for many days, they couldn't find the mysterious creature or capture the attacker. So, Lockhart came up with a new idea. In the faculty lounge, he looked around and said, "I think we could start a dueling club to fully train students in self-defense. What do you think of this proposal?" But no one paid attention to Lockhart. The teachers sitting opposite him all had stern faces. "You're not interested in this proposal? Oh, I see," Lockhart laughed. "You're all teachers in the school every day. You don't know how to duel. Your practical combat skills are too poor." Lockhart looked around, preparing to find an assistant. He first ruled out the tall and strong Hagrid, then his gaze fell on Snape. A sallow face, thin as a chick, his fighting ability was probably not good. He then looked at Professor McGonagall, an old woman, probably not very strong. Finally, Lockhart's gaze settled on Professor Flitwick. "You're the one, you little dwarf. Professor Flitwick, do you have some time lately? Come help me. I need an assistant to demonstrate defense against the dark arts with me. Let's have a duel, so the students can learn something." Upon hearing it was a 2-on-1 duel with Lockhart, the professors, who had initially been uninterested, immediately perked up. Snape, sitting in a low armchair, his eyes gleaming, a mocking smile on his lips, said, "Let me do it." Professor McGonagall also raised her eyebrows, rubbing her hands together. "Let me do it. I've never participated in a dueling club before. I'll do it." Professor Flitwick stood up. Though he wasn't even as tall as the table, he declared without hesitation, "I was a dueling champion in my youth. After all, I'll do it. Let me do it." Lockhart was dumbfounded. A small dueling club, and they're already fighting over it. These bumpkins, they've never seen anything like it. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183 New Opportunity Words Den One More Mohimore. On Monday morning, a notice suddenly appeared on Hufflepuff's bulletin board. The dueling club is hereby established. This notice is issued by Hogwarts Headmaster Dumbledore, November 20th, 8 p.m. All the students crowded around the bulletin board, chattering excitedly. There was no way around it. Lockhart's daily routine consisted mostly of picking a passage from the book and having everyone perform a play. Half a semester had passed, and he hadn't learned a single useful lesson, though he had certainly learned a lot about an actor prepares. Was the school finally going to teach something useful? Standing in the crowd, Hannah said expectantly, "I hope Professor Dumbledore will personally teach us dueling. My grandfather told me he used to be a defense against the dark arts teacher. He must be very experienced." "How old is Professor Dumbledore? Does he still have any practical combat skills?" Susan asked, raising her eyebrows. "I don't know, maybe 120 years old," Hannah guessed. 150 years old, perhaps, Susan thought for a moment. "No, I look like I'm 200 years old." "Look at the wrinkles on his face," Macmillan laughed. The students burst into laughter. No one cared how old Dumbledore really was. In everyone's eyes, Dumbledore seemed eternally healthy and long-lived. "Maybe Professor Flitwick will teach us," Neville interjected. "My grandmother said Professor Flitwick was a fighting champion when he was young." "Professor Flitwick, I heard from a Ravenclaw student that," Susan whispered, "he's a half-wizard and half-house elf." Hearing this, the young wizards eagerly gossiped about Professor Flitwick's identity again. He certainly wasn't a pure-blood wizard. Neville looked at the silent Ralph and asked, "Ralph, what do you think? Who'll teach us dueling?" "No need to guess, it'll be Lockhart," Ralph snapped out of his reverie and chuckled softly. Besides him, who else do you think would suggest starting a dueling club? If it's him, I'd rather not participate, Justin complained loudly, and the other students echoed him. Most students now believed Lockhart was a fraud. Ralph remained silent, staring thoughtfully at the notice. Since Lockhart was hosting a dueling club, why not take the opportunity to search the Defense Against the Dark Arts office? As the dueling club event drew near, the Great Hall was redecorated after the banquet, the 4 dining tables were replaced by a gilded stage, and hundreds of candles floated in the air. All the students were speculating about who the teacher would be, unaware that the professors had gone to great lengths to secure this spot. Finally, at Professor McGonagall's suggestion, the fairest method of drawing lots was adopted. Professor Snape was lucky enough to get this precious opportunity to lend a hand with Lockhart. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick also hinted to Snape to teach Lockhart a lesson, at least to keep him in line for a while. This was probably the first time the 4 houses had been so united. Snape, of course, understood perfectly, even considering whether to injure Lockhart more severely, so he could once again substitute for Defense Against the Dark Arts. Clearly, Snape had also benefited from the 6 months Quirrell was injured. At 8 o'clock that evening, all the students surged toward the Great Hall on time. Walking along, Sherry asked, "Rolf, are you really going to search Lockhart's office?" "My intuition tells me Lockhart definitely has something going on," Ralph said softly. "Someone told me, don't ignore your intuition, it's data processed too quickly for the human brain to comprehend." "Do you want me to come with you?" Sherry whispered. "No need," Ralph smiled. "I'm faster, maybe I can still make it to the duel club." The girl with the ponytail was silent for a moment, then cautioned, "Then be careful." Perhaps afraid the boy wouldn't take it seriously, Sherry added shyly, "Really, be careful." "I know." Ralph said goodbye to the girl and turned to walk in another direction. The girl stood at the top of the stairs, watching the boy's figure disappear into the depths of the corridor before turning and walking toward the Great Hall. Ralph followed the 3rd-floor corridor and quickly arrived at the door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts office. His figure vanished, allowing a Botricle to open the door, and he quietly entered the room. The Defense Against the Dark Arts office, lavishly decorated by Lockhart, had wool carpets on the floor, walls covered in exquisite tapestries, and long beehive candles casting ample light. Countless framed portraits of Lockhart hung on the walls, and everyone looked up, but despite the door being open, the wizard was nowhere to be seen. Rolf closed the door and walked step by step to the desk. He sat down and casually began to browse the items on the desk. The desk was large, with an inkwell and quills, and scattered cakes, cookies, and peaches. A delicate silver cup surrounded a wine jug, and a cedar chest was filled with letters. The boy glanced at them casually. Most were letters from Lockhart fans, along with his replies to them. Rolf rummaged through the items but couldn't find Tom Riddle's diary in the desk or cabinets, so he opened the bedroom door. Entering the bedroom, Rolf suddenly perked up. In the corner of the bedroom, there was a small workbench covered with various ointments, herbs, and potions, along with many bottles containing a golden liquid. Ralph noticed that the liquid and packaging were exactly the same as the shampoo Lockhart had given Snape when Lockhart started school. Lockhart had indeed mentioned more than once in class that he had invented a very effective shampoo, but it was too expensive, and his secret ambition was to sell those shampoos. Could this be it? But it was just shampoo. There seemed to be nothing strange in the bedroom. Ralph was somewhat disappointed, at least these things had nothing to do with the diary. The boy found a piece of parchment on the workbench. He picked it up and glanced at the shampoo recipe: honey, incense, oils, and whale oil. There were more than 30 ingredients, and the composition was very detailed, except for the last ingredient, which was deliberately crossed out with ink. Ralph frowned. What kind of ingredient would need to be crossed out? The boy began to carefully examine the workbench, and he quickly found silver eggshell fragments in a grinding bowl. Ralph picked up a silver eggshell fragment, sniffed it, then crushed it again and tasted it briefly on his tongue. Ralph closed his eyes in thought, his elbows resting on the workbench, his 10 fingertips touching to form a spire. He already knew the last ingredient in the shampoo. No wonder Malfoy saw Lockhart at the pet store in Nocturne Alley during summer vacation. He had secretly gone to buy that ingredient. And what about the mysterious animal that attacked Ron and Filch that night? He knew what it was too. Chapter 184 Traditional wizard battles emphasize stopping short of defeat. When Ralph returned to the Great Hall, He found the room in complete chaos. The young wizards were practicing hand-to-hand combat, but it was more like a brawl than wizarding combat. Everyone was using every trick in the book except ones in magic. Gryffindor's Seamus Figeni, like a monkey stealing a peach, grabbed Dean Thomas's weak spot. Dean, not to be outdone, grabbed Seamus's skull in return. Justin, whose mouth hadn't been cleaned for 2 days, opened it and breathed at Macmillan's nose, attempting to use a biological weapon. Ralph jerked his head to the side, dodging a shoe thrown by someone, which struck Susan on the head. Hannah seemed to have gotten carried away with acting in defense against the dark arts class. As soon as Neville raised his wand, the little girl immediately collapsed to the ground. Neville rushed over, and as he helped Hannah up, she struggled to leave her last words, perfectly embodying the essence of Down's acting. Are you two acting out Romeo and Juliet here? Harry and Malfoy did use magic. Harry was hit by the dancing charm, his legs twitching uncontrollably. Malfoy was hit by the laughing charm, clutching his stomach and laughing so hard he was limp. The two lay on the ground, still wrestling and grappling, but from a distance, it looked more like an affectionate embrace. Look how happy Malfoy is. Ralph weaved through the crowd and quickly found Sherry and Hermione. The two girls were fighting quite skillfully. After Hermione's numerous complaints, Dumbledore had been dedicating 2 lessons a week to teaching her defense against the dark arts from her textbook. After more than a year of study, her skills were quite good. Sherry's magic was partly learned from Ralph, used to deal with the magical creatures in the box. Another part came from tutoring Lupin with Ralph during the summer. Her level was also quite high. Sherry and Hermione's fight was quite a sight to behold. Seeing Ralph return, they both stopped fighting. Hermione quickly approached and asked, "Did you find anything?" "I found this in Lockhart's office," Ralph said, a silver shard appearing in his hand. Hermione took it and asked curiously, "What's this?" Sherry, as her assistant, was quite knowledgeable. After observing it for a while, she asked uncertainly, "Is it the shell of a harpy egg?" "That's right," Ralph nodded slightly. "I discovered Lockhart was secretly using harpy eggs to make shampoo in his office, so, the mysterious creature that attacked Ron and Filch in the prize room that night was probably a harpy that escaped from Lockhart." Ralph lowered his voice. Ron and Filch both felt the creature that attacked them was very large, but they couldn't see it. That's because the harpy can freely change its size. After the attack, it shrank instantly, so, when Malfoy saw Lockhart in the magical creatures shop in Nocturne Alley, he was buying a harpy. Hermione asked in surprise. "That's right. Harpies are forbidden magical creatures, they can only be bought in Nocturne Alley," Ralph said calmly. "Then, were Lockhart and a harpy the ones who attacked Filch and Mrs. Pins?" Sherry asked, looking up. "That's hard to say," Ralph shook his head. He didn't find the diary in Lockhart's office. The attack on the prize room was related to Al Snake, but Filch and Mrs. Pins, that was another matter. These were 2 separate things and shouldn't be confused. "By the way, how's it going here?" Ralph asked. "Did Lockhart and Professor Snape have a real fight?" "They did," Sherry chuckled, covering her mouth. "Lockhart got a one-sided beating from Professor Snape." Ralph glanced sideways at Hermione. The girl looked a little embarrassed, her eyes widening suddenly. She'd been stubborn for so long, and hadn't admitted defeat yet. "How could someone like Lockhart dare to run a dueling club?" Sherry asked, puzzled. "Wouldn't hiring any professor as an assistant expose his abilities? As a con man, Lockhart isn't afraid of being exposed. He dared to come under Dumbledore's nose as a teacher, and a renowned one at that," Ralph scoffed. "Compared to this, what's a small dueling club? If Lockhart had any sense of propriety, he wouldn't have come to Hogwarts. You could say Lockhart is a little clever, but not much. His desire to show off far outweighs his reason." Sherry and Hermione both seemed thoughtful. Lockhart, whom Ralph called overly eager to show off, was jumping around in the crowd. "Stand up, Ernie, watch out, Miss Fawcett, pinch hard, the bleeding will stop immediately." But Lockhart performed his demonstration, but didn't use his so-called superior healing magic to save a single student. He finally returned to the stage and shouted, "This won't do, Professor Snape. We have to stop them. Or how about we have a pair of students perform? Longbottom and Abbott would be perfect." Lockhart clearly appreciated their injury-free performance. Snape's dark eyes flashed coldly as he chuckled, "That's not a good idea, Professor Lockhart. Scamander seems to be alone, without a partner. Let him come up here. Scamander, come up here." Hearing Snape call his name, Ralph grimaced and reluctantly walked towards the stage. The students gradually quieted down. Then who should we have for the sparring? Lockhart looked around and suggested, how about Mr. Malfoy? Malfoy, still lying on the ground, twitched at the corner of his mouth. What grudge did he hold against Scamander to send him to his death? Snape didn't agree. His gaze swept through the crowd, lingering on Harry for a long time before finally settling on Lockhart. Malfoy is too weak, you should instruct Scamander, Snape said with a sneer. Professor Lockhart, you should strengthen Scamander and teach him a lesson. That's right, the Slytherin students cheered. Lockhart hesitated. On the Orient Express, he had only seen Ralph save people, not witnessed the boy fighting, but he had heard some rumors afterward. Like how he stopped a dark wizard. Professor Lockhart, you're not afraid to fight a student, are you? Professor Snape mocked. How could I? Lockhart chuckled dryly. I'm afraid of hurting him. Don't worry, Professor Lockhart, Ralph smiled. I'll take care of myself. Having reached this point, especially under the watchful eyes of everyone, Lockhart was in a difficult position and had no choice but to grit his teeth and agree. Lockhart raised his wand, waving it left and right, trying to perform some cool sword flourishes, but accidentally dropped it to the ground. Lockhart quickly picked up his wand, laughing to cover it up. Oops, my wand got a little too excited. Rolf, I don't want to hurt you. Let's have a civilized fight later. 3, 2, 1, go, Snape shouted. Lockhart, having just been reprimanded by Snape, had learned his lesson. He immediately raised his wand, aiming at the boy. All the students stared intently at Rolf, eager to witness his legendary wandless spellcasting. But to everyone's eyes, Rolf walked confidently towards Lockhart with his hands in his pockets, exuding an incredibly arrogant and irritating aura. Lockhart's face darkened. This was clearly disrespect. Lockhart raised his wand, finally having a chance to aim, and suddenly shrieked, Expelliarmus! A blinding red light shot towards Rolf, but the boy didn't stop, and just as the light was about to hide him, he jerked his head to dodge. The spider sense's warning allowed Ralph to easily dodge the attack. He planned to try it later, dodging Avada Kedavra's attack with a tilt of his head. Lockhart was furious. He fired another spell, which Ralph again dodged with a tilt of his head. All the students gasped, and the witches applauded wildly. Ralph dodged 3 times, quickly crossed the stage, and stood beside Lockhart. He raised his wand high, aiming it at Lockhart's head. Ralph, traditional wizarding combat emphasizes restraint, Lockhart hurriedly said. But the spell flashed by, and Lockhart was sent flying, crashing heavily into the wall. My arm, it feels broken, Lockhart cried out in agony. Don't move, Lockhart, I'll heal you, Snape said lazily, walking over. No, no, Lockhart said weakly, but Snape's wand was already aimed at his arm. Chapter 185 Law on the Protection of Minors. The newly established dueling club had only held one offline event when Vice-Headmaster Professor McGonagall abruptly called it off, indefinitely extending its suspension. There was no other way. A major accident had occurred resulting in injury. Surprisingly, the injured person wasn't a student receiving training, but rather the club's instructor. Furthermore, this instructor was injured by a young wizard during a lesson. It's truly hard to accept that a professor's skill level is inferior to a student's. It's like hiring a tutor for math lessons, and the tutor claims to be an emo gold medalist, only to find out their math skills aren't even as good as yours. But after everyone learned it was Lockhart, well, it's all right now. We can say that Hogwarts teachers aren't that bad, right? What? Lockhart is also a Hogwarts professor? Just the annual defense against the dark arts supplies. Who's on your side? Dead Quirrell is your true friend, Lockhart. Lockhart's lackluster performance meant even his most die-hard fans at the school only dared to praise his looks. Anyone who dared to praise his strength would be spat on. Lockhart himself certainly wouldn't admit he'd been defeated by his students. Even as he was rushed to the school hospital, he was still trying to convince everyone, I deliberately let Scamander hit me. If I wanted to stop him, it would have been effortless. But I thought, to broaden everyone's horizons, let them see the effects of being hit by a spell. Only after making excuses for himself did Lockhart finally pass out. Afterwards, the students generally affectionately called Professor Lockhart Big Professor Lockhart. His whole body was weak except for his mouth. Every student was discussing Ralph's strength. Many junior wizards had witnessed him casting spells without a wand or sound, something only a few powerful wizards could do. His reaction speed was even more astonishing. He dodged 3 disarming spells at close range, finally landing his wand on Lockhart's head, a fighting style no one had ever seen before. It was too abstract. Many students privately discussed that Ralph was actually no weaker than the professors. Coupled with his outstanding looks and humble attitude, those who were originally Lockhart's die-hard fans transformed into Ralph's fans. More and more students were seeking out Ralph every day, not to treat their pets, but to learn combat training. Even a young witch offered to hire him as her bodyguard for a hefty price. The price left Ralph speechless. He could only sigh. What a rich little girl. Lockhart's injuries were serious, requiring a 5-day stay at the university hospital. But this had nothing to do with Ralph. He had only caused Lockhart to break his arm, a minor injury that Madame Pomfrey could heal in a second. The reason for Lockhart's prolonged hospitalization was a secondary injury from Professor Snape. While kindly treating Lockhart's arm, he accidentally shattered the bone inside Lockhart's arm. The bone fragments had to be completely removed, otherwise bacteria would form a local infection source, leading to suppurative osteomyelitis. Lockhart couldn't say anything to Snape yet, or Malfoy would have something to say. During the last Quidditch match, Malfoy broke his leg, and it was Lockhart who treated him, literally pulling out a bone, forcing him to take bone regenerating medication and enduring pain all night. Snape and Lockhart's actions were essentially the same. And Lockhart really had no recourse. In the words of a die-hard Lockhart fan, he was just trying to help. He didn't mean it that way. He even apologized. What more do you want? Is this nagging meaningful? Of course, Professor Snape, being a person of low character, didn't care whether Lockhart would forgive him. He only cared about how long Lockhart would stay in the hospital. 5 days was clearly too short. To allow Lockhart to take a paid leave and rest longer, Snape decided to lend a hand. In potions class, Snape strode into the classroom, his greasy voice trailing off. Everyone, turn to page 270. Hurry up, don't dawdle. This lesson was supposed to be about brewing a hair growth potion, but Snape's last-minute change caused all the students to exchange glances, but no one spoke as they silently turned the pages. After a year and a half of this constant manipulation, the young wizards generally didn't question Snape. After all, doing so would only result in point deductions, and even double the point deductions. Today we're brewing a potion called Dragon Bone Piercing Water. Does anyone know what it does? Seeing no hands raised, Snape gestured with his chin. Scamander, it helps creatures with comminuted fractures remove the broken bones from their bodies, Ralph answered, standing up. Tisk, tisk, looks like you've been treating your weird animals quite a bit, Snape scoffed. Well, being with animals all the time, I wouldn't be surprised if you had a troll baby one day, given how much you love those stupid magical creatures. What are you glaring at, Shirley Swinton? Ravenclaw, deduct 10 points, Ralph tugged at the girl's sleeve, trying to calm her down. He hadn't expected the usually gentle and taciturn Sherry to suddenly glare at Snape. Of course, this little gesture earned him another point deduction from Snape. After spitting out snake venom, Snape tapped the blackboard with his wand and said, "Today we're going to brew Dragon Bone Spike Water. Whoever brews the best, gives it to Professor Lockhart so he can recover faster." The students exchanged hesitant glances. They always handed in their brewed potions, but never gave them to anyone. This was the first time they'd given it to the school hospital. Were they sure they weren't afraid someone would die from drinking it? Ralph immediately got to work. This potion wasn't difficult for him, as Snape had said. He had indeed brewed it for many animals. So, when Snape passed by Ralph and Sherry's cauldron, he didn't even glance at it, standing menacingly behind Neville and Hannah. Without Snape watching, the two couldn't brew the potion properly, and now with Snape standing there, Neville and Hannah became even more nervous, haphazardly throwing ingredients into the cauldron. Snape smirked. They were making mistakes from the very first step. It was truly remarkable. No wonder they were his hand-picked duo of idiots. But he didn't remind them. Instead, he watched quietly. The Dragon Bone Piercing Water, which should have been a bright green alkaline substance, had turned into a muddy, rotten egg-smelling potion in Neville and Hannah's cauldron. "Everyone, take a look." Snape scooped some out with a spoon, holding it high so everyone could see it. Neville's face turned pink, and he trembled all over, seemingly on the verge of tears. Hannah was also nervous, swallowing hard. Surprisingly, Snape didn't mock them. Instead, he said gently, "Well done, Mr. Longbottom and Miss Abbott. I didn't expect you two to have such outstanding talent in potions." Neville and Hannah were stunned. Was he sure it wasn't sarcasm? "Your potion is the best. I've decided to give it to Professor Lockhart, Hoping you recover soon. After class, walking down the corridor, Neville asked with a terrified expression, "Rover, won't that potion kill someone?" "Probably not." Rover thought for a moment and reassured him, "Neville, even if someone does die, it's okay. You're a minor, only 12 years old. Murder isn't illegal. At most, you'll be expelled." Chapter 186 Smith's Old House. That night, Lockhart lay in bed, filled with remorse. He had roamed the wizarding world for over a decade, using his amnesia to ambush countless wizards and gain their memories, almost never failing. But in just 6 months at Hogwarts, he had been plagued by bad luck, suffering all the setbacks he had never experienced in his previous life. Yet, he dared not leave. Resigning before a year was up would mean huge compensation under his contract, plus a public clarification of his departure, a fatal blow to his future career. Lockhart wanted to run for Minister for Magic. He couldn't afford to leave with a stain on his record. But staying meant constant injuries, which Lockhart couldn't endure. "Why did you start a dueling club? Was it just a bad habit?" Lockhart raised his arm to slap himself, but a bandaged hand throbbed with pain, as if hundreds of ants were devouring him. Lockhart groaned in pain again. Just then, the door to the ward opened, and Madame Pomfrey entered carrying a potion. Her face was stern as she said, "Professor Lockhart, it's time for your potion." Lockhart took the potion with his uninjured left hand. Looking at the muddy liquid, he couldn't help but frown. "Madame Pomfrey, can you even drink this? This is Dragon Bone Piercer Potion, specifically designed to remove bone fragments from your body," Madame Pomfrey explained softly. "After drinking it, take a nap, and you should be fine soon, but this is too." Lockhart looked troubled. "Good medicine tastes bitter," Madame Pomfrey persuaded. "Madame Pomfrey, tell me the truth. Did Snape brew this?" Lockhart stared intently at Madame Pomfrey. He had already realized that Snape harbored deep malice towards him. If it really was a potion brewed by Snape, he certainly wouldn't drink it. "This," Madame Pomfrey hesitated for a moment, then said, "it really wasn't brewed by Professor Snape. I absolutely won't lie to you." "All right." Lockhart was relieved. He took the potion, sniffed it, and almost vomited. He quickly pulled out a large piece of candy, stuffed it into his mouth, then pinched his nose and swallowed the potion in one gulp. Lockhart suddenly foamed at the mouth, his whole body convulsing on the bed. He whimpered, "This potion is poisonous? Professor Lockhart, Professor Lockhart, someone come quick." Lockhart's condition suddenly worsened, and he was urgently transferred to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic and Magic. This news quickly spread throughout Hogwarts. According to Madame Pomfrey, Lockhart was not in mortal danger, but might not be able to return until after Christmas. Neville and Hannah were uneasy for several days after hearing this news, fearing that a group of aurors would suddenly appear and take them to Azkaban. Hannah even prepared for a life on the run, the little girl frequently going to the kitchen to have the house elf prepare food that would keep for a long time. She and Neville aided on their escape. Fortunately, the school ultimately classified it as a work-related injury, not potion poisoning, which relieved Neville and Hannah. Lockhart's hard work for defense against the dark arts was truly touching, but even more touching was Professor Snape. With the Hogwarts teaching staff short-staffed, he willingly took on 2 roles, serving as the substitute defense against the dark arts teacher. If it weren't for Professor Binns, who didn't want a salary, this year's Teacher of the Year award would definitely have gone to Snape. Snape, resuming his role as the substitute defense against the dark arts teacher, brought in a troll on his first day, defeating it with a single spell, and then had the young wizards practice. Although those who disliked Snape still disliked him, they had to admit. Snape's teaching level was indeed very high. It just goes to show, without comparison, there's no harm done. As December approached and the Christmas holidays drew near, snowflakes finally began to fall. Though it was the first snowfall, it fell like goose feathers, and Hogwarts quickly accumulated a thick layer of snow. After Filch's injury, the daily task of shoveling snow fell to Hagrid, who carried a large basket on his back like a pet owner, shoveling snow into the basket and then dumping it in the open area outside the castle. Soon, a small snow mountain appeared on the school grounds, which, under Dumbledore's magic, transformed into a large snow sculpture. Although it was amusing, the weather was simply too cold, and the students spent all their time outside of class huddled in the common room. Professor Flitwick taught a spell called the warming charm, which warmed the body by tapping the head. However, the downside of this spell was that it easily caused thirst. Therefore, every student carried a thermos, looking like a retired old man. Professor McGonagall also taught everyone how to transform snowballs into flames, but those flames were all icy cold and couldn't ignite anything. So, the common room was often filled with students having firefights, throwing fireballs at each other. In her biology class, each young wizard had to endure the cold, dressing the mandrake in clothes, socks, and scarves. Mandrakes were also sensitive to the cold and easily froze to death. Ralph had secretly kept a few dresses to give to the Nifflers as Christmas presents this year. Ralph hadn't finished brewing his truth potion, but thankfully there hadn't been any attacks recently, so he focused all his attention on gathering intelligence on the Smith family mansion. Sitting in the library, Ralph was flipping through a book when he suddenly heard hurried footsteps beside him. Ralph looked up and saw Hermione and Sherry approaching, placing a stack of old newspapers in front of him. "Ralph," Hermione said excitedly, her cheeks flushed. "The intelligence on the Smith family you wanted?" Ralph picked up the Daily Prophet, staring at the yellowed photograph. It was a 50-year-old newspaper. The photograph showed a very fat old witch wearing an exquisite ginger yellow wig. The caption below the photo read, "Hufflepuff descendant, the renowned collector Hepzibah Smith was found dead today at Smith's old house. The Ministry of Magic has determined that Hepzibah Smith's house elf, Hawthorne, is a prime suspect, having poisoned his evening cocoa. We must reiterate the importance of house elf safety." Ralph knew it was Tom Riddle who had framed the house elf to obtain the Hufflepuff cup and the Slytherin pendant. Sherry quickly handed him another newspaper. The boy glanced at the headline, "Hufflepuff's old house sold by Hepzibah Smith's grandniece due to ghostly appearances." The owner of Borgin Burke's shop reportedly bought the entire collection. Ralph frowned. Chapter 187 The Cowardly Lizard and the Sudden Death of the Night. Hepzibah Smith, a pure-blooded Hufflepuff, inherited not only Helga Hufflepuff's golden cup but also the framed portrait of her and her house elves. Decades ago, however, Hepzibah Smith was murdered by Tom Riddle, and her old house, along with her collection, was sold by her grandniece to Borgin and Burke. This was perfectly normal. After all, Hepzibah Smith was a renowned antique dealer, and her collection was incredibly valuable. The problem, however, is that Borgin and Burke is also an antique shop, buying items from various ancient families to resell at high prices. It's like Burke bought Slytherin's locket from Voldemort's mother, Merope, for a paltry 10 galleons, then resold it to Hepzibah Smith at a much higher price. Similarly, the items Borgin and Burke acquired from Smith couldn't remain in their possession indefinitely. They were likely already sold. Once sold, recovering them would be like finding a needle in a haystack, extremely difficult. Ralph sighed softly. He had thought finding the Smith mansion would simplify things, but Tom Riddle had suddenly complicated matters again. The boy stared at the newspapers, asking curiously, "Where did you two get these, almost 50 years old newspapers? How could you find them?" Shirley smiled, her eyes crinkling into crescent moons, and said, "They were on the far right shelf in the library. They had the entire Daily Prophet there." "Shirley and I went through all the old newspapers." Hermione raised her pointed chin. Ralph was momentarily moved. He composed himself, his expression serious, and said, "Thank you both." Shirley didn't offer any pleasantries, only a radiant smile, like the first winter plum blossom on a branch after the onset of winter, exquisitely beautiful. "You're welcome," Hermione grinned, revealing her 2 front teeth. "You'll have to give me an extra Christmas present." "All right," Ralph laughed, teasingly adding, "but you still owe me a bet." "Can't we honor our bet?" "It's been half a year." Hermione deliberately looked left and right, avoiding Ralph's gaze. She asked, confused, "A bet? What bet?" "I don't remember." Ralph gently pressed down on the girl's messy head, preventing her from shaking it. Hermione slapped his hand away, disdainfully saying, "I knew I shouldn't have looked up the information for you, you stingy little devil." Ralph chuckled. "You only have one Christmas present left." Hermione glared at him, asking softly, "Are you both going home for the Christmas holidays?" Shirley shook her head. "I'm not going back to the convent." "I'm not going home either," Ralph said softly. This Christmas, he wouldn't go back to the Dragon Sanctuary in Romania, nor to his old house in Scamander, Dorset, England. No one was home at either house. What would he do there? Newt's parents were both in America, and he had even taken Tina to the Brazilian rainforest for their wedding anniversary, clearly not wanting his grandson to disturb his retirement. Homeless, Ralph had no choice but to stay at Hogwarts for the holiday. Hermione hesitated, and seeing that neither of them was leaving, she said softly, "Then I won't go back either." "Didn't you say you were going skiing with your parents for Christmas?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Skiing might not be for me," Hermione said, blushing and shaking her head. "I'd rather stay at Hogwarts and study hard. My parents want me to do well on my exams, and they'll understand. It's only Christmas, yet. There are only 6 months until the final exams. I have to get serious," Hermione said smugly, pulling a neatly folded piece of paper from her pocket. "This is my Christmas study plan, almost down to the second," the girl stretched, full of energy. "Let's stay in the library for Christmas and study hard. We'll definitely get top 3 spots in next year's final exams." Before the Christmas holidays, Slytherin and Ravenclaw played their last Quidditch match of the term. But to everyone's surprise, Ravenclaw, who hadn't won in years, actually won, taking a crucial win from Slytherin. Their new seeker, Cho Chang, caught a golden snitch right under Malfoy's nose, securing the final victory. Cho Chang instantly became a celebrity at Hogwarts. Even Cedric praised her flying skills and wanted to have a deeper discussion with her about ball handling. Being scored on by the underdog team they'd underestimated before the game was certainly demoralizing, and Malfoy's timid avoidance of the runner earned him the nickname Cowardly Lizard. Captain Flint was hit by the runner within the first 2 minutes and had to leave the field, earning him the nickname the Dead Knight. Of course, the key to Ravenclaw's victory was an off-field factor. Someone secretly took a picture, which immediately circulated throughout Hogwarts, causing a huge uproar. It turned out that Terrence Higgins, the former seeker whose position had been stolen, had punched Malfoy hard during team practice, almost knocking him unconscious. The Slytherin infighting was good news. After all, with their superior equipment, it would have been difficult to stop them from defending their title without some off-field interference. Terrence Higgins was also widely suspected of being a mole, definitely bribed by the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Slytherin slammed his hat on Gryffindor's head, and the little lion didn't hold back, leading to several clashes between the two houses before the Christmas holidays. Professor Snape relentlessly deducted points from Gryffindor, and Professor McGonagall wasn't to be outdone. The house grades of both houses plummeted. Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw inexplicably found themselves in the top 2 spots, their happiness coming too quickly. As the Christmas holidays approached, the entire Hogwarts was redecorated. The Great Hall looked magnificent, adorned with over a dozen Christmas trees covered in silver frost and thick ribbons of mistletoe and holly forming a cross. After a grand banquet, the last statutory holiday of the year finally arrived, Christmas. There were no makeup days, no unavoidable absences from school, and everyone would enjoy a 2-week break. In previous years, many students stayed behind for Christmas, especially 5th and 7th year students preparing for their OWLs and NEWT exams. Few would go home. But this year, almost all the students had left. There was no other way. After several attacks, even Lockhart had been transferred to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Arts. The young wizards were simply too terrified. Neville saw that Rolf, Sherry, and Hermione had all stayed, and he originally wanted to stay too. But Hannah invited him to visit Professor Lockhart at St. Mungo's Hospital for the holidays, and the two of them would spend a whole day together in London. That evening, Neville was still confidently declaring that he would carry out Hermione's revision plan at Hogwarts, but the next morning he changed his mind, leaving quite decisively. The whole change of heart took less than 3 minutes. However, before leaving, Neville's Raffer stayed behind to keep Rolf company. The pregnant rooster had finally laid an egg, and Rolf needed Raffer's help to incubate it. The basilisk egg was Rolf's Christmas present to Raffer, a free basilisk son. Raffer could only secretly rejoice, thanks to the generous donors book friend 2021030110654111778 inches, just love to wonder in the water, and book friend 2,022,051 6,221,529,144 for their generous donations. There's one more chapter coming soon. It might be a little while, no rush. Chapter 188 Ron the Injured. Christmas was fast approaching. Early one morning, Rove was awakened by a series of cawing sounds. He opened his eyes and heard something banging against the window, making a clattering sound. Still sleepy, he threw off the covers, slipped on his slippers, and went to the windowsill. The Niffler, who had been perched at the foot of the bed, realized its blanket was gone and, like a caterpillar, burrowed towards the warm covers. Last night, during a selection of magical creatures, Rove had chosen a Sniffler to serve him in bed, to warm his feet. In the dead of winter, although the room was warm, Having a furry animal warming his feet was incredibly cozy and comforting. Rove pulled back the curtains and was startled to see hundreds of owls circling outside. He had forgotten to open the window last night, and the owls, wanting to deliver Christmas presents this morning, were kept out of the room. Rove quickly opened the window, a cold wind whistling around him. He pulled a warm blanket over himself. The owls swarmed in, crowding into the room and dropping their gifts on the floor. One owl even tried to peck at Rove's head, but as an apology, he immediately offered a dead mouse. After they had eaten their fill, they left satisfied. The Niffler was also awakened by the gift-giving owls. It crawled out of bed, jumped onto Rove's shoulder, stretched out a claw, pointed at the boy's feet, and stomped its feet vigorously. The Niffler was clearly trying to tell Rove not to forget last night's deal. It was demanding its reward. Rove pulled out a gallon and handed it to the little guy. The little creature happily put the gallon in its pouch and quickly scurried back into its box. Compared to the Niffler, Rove actually wanted to use the phoenix fox to warm his feet. Each of its feathers radiated heat, like a small stove. But unfortunately, no matter what reward Rove offered, it stubbornly refused. HMPH, what a chaste and fierce bird. Sooner or later, I'll tame you completely. After washing up and changing his clothes, Ralph began unwrapping his Christmas presents. This year's gifts were more than double what he received last year. Last year, Ralph was just a little veterinarian who treated gynecological ailments, but his slightly immature face didn't attract the attention of older women. This year, however, he was much more famous, had grown taller, and his fan base at Hogwarts had exploded. But the gifts from these fans were all unoriginal, almost entirely chocolates, enough to last until next Christmas. Fortunately, these chocolates were from Honeydukes at Hogsmeade, and Ralph planned to ask the proprietress for a half-price refund. Both sides would make a profit. Hagrid's gift was as simple and straightforward as ever, a huge bundle of unicorn fur, enough to make a blanket. Only he could give such a simple yet outrageously extravagant Christmas present. Ralph gave Hagrid a 6-month-old photo of Norbur the dragon. Hagrid would never see Norbur, so he could only feast his eyes on him. Of course, Ralph, as the Dragon Knight, also appeared in the photos, riding Hagrid's darling daughter, soaring through the sky in various poses. How carefree. Professor Flitwick gave Ralph a book of fighting training essentials, which he had written himself, and he even suggested that Ralph participate in the fighting tournament. Although Professor Flitwick wasn't present at the dueling club that night, he was amazed after hearing about it from his students. Ralph gave him a bottle of nitroglycerin pills, which he could use when watching Ravenclaw Quidditch matches. Professor McGonagall's gift was a large box, which Ralph opened to find the Nimbus Corporation's new flying broomstick blocks. These blocks were similar to Lego, requiring assembly and quite challenging. Ralph gave her a beautiful cat tree set, so she could play on it when she became a cat girl. After the school year ended, Snape still wanted the basilisk, and Ralph gave him a drop of basilisk venom as a gift, leaving him itching for more, but unable to have it. This time, Snape finally didn't give her heir, he gave her a copy of the Travels of Azkaban. The book recounted the stories of expelled students entering Azkaban, including Newt's name. Professor Dumbledore's gift was the most precious, 2 sheets of magical paper. One person could write on them, and the other holding the paper could instantly see the contents. Like a two-way mirror, these magical papers allowed for communication from a great distance. Knowing the headmaster loved sweets, Ralph gave him a large box of White Rabbit candy imported from the Far East. Hermione's gift was a pair of gloves, though their design was ugly. Ugly? Absolutely ugly. But at least they were wearable, preventing uneven fingers. Hermione was a beginner, having recently been learning knitting from Sherry, but unfortunately, her skills were still far from perfect. Ralph gave the girl a small handbag, its interior enlarged considerably with a seamless stretch charm, enough to hold many books. Hermione carries a heavy backpack to class every day. At this rate, she'll develop a hunchback sooner or later, but it's not too late to correct it now. Ralph finally opened Sherry's gift, a beautifully crafted Irish whistle she had made herself. The boy picked it up and tried to blow it softly, but it just whirred and produced no tune. In Ravenclaw dormitory, Sherry carefully opened Ralph's Christmas present, a small box containing a silver hair tie made of unicorn hair. The girl held the hair tie between 2 fingers, raised it high, and gently twisted it in the sunlight. She loved the gift. Sherry put her hands behind her back, untied her ponytail, and her red hair cascaded down like a waterfall. She reached up and gathered her hair, retied the ponytail with a hair tie, and wrapped it around her neck. The girl ran her fingers through the soft strands of hair that reached her chest, her eyes filled with joy. After opening his gift, Ralph left the Hufflepuff common room and walked through the empty castle. The usually bustling Hogwarts was deserted today. You could even run around naked and no one would care. Of course, Ralph was just thinking about it. Passing Filch's office, he bumped into Mrs. Norris, and knelt down to get her some cat food. He'd been feeding Mrs. Norris ever since Filch was injured. Just then, a group of people came out of the Great Hall, the twins and Ginny. Last Christmas, the Wheeleyes had taken the Orient Express to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary to visit their second son, Charlie. This year, they'd taken the train to Egypt to visit their eldest son, Bill, who was grave raiding there, but the tickets were too expensive, so they hadn't brought the other children. They all had to stay at Hogwarts. Ralph greeted them and, seeing Ginny carrying a lunchbox, asked curiously, "Where are you going?" "To see Ron. He's still in the school hospital," Ginny replied with a smile. "What happened to Ron?" Ron frowned. "He was attacked too." "No, not attacked," Fred smiled strangely. "Did you hear? The last potions class before Christmas," George continued. Ron suddenly gouged out Harry's eyes and threw them into the cauldron. Of course, not real eyes, just transfigured eyes, but they looked very real. Ginny couldn't help but burst into laughter. And then, Professor Snape immediately had a fit and shoved Ron's head into the cauldron. Late but not late. Won't do it again next time. Chapter 189 Professor McGonagall's Cat Tree. Speaking of Ron's outrageous act of gouging out Harry's eyes, Ron has to take the blame. After all, in potions class, he had a flash of inspiration and altered Snape's recipe, even getting extra points, leading many students to mistakenly believe, "I could do that too," but no one else had Ron and Harry's wild imaginations. They truly deserve to be called the second most foolish duo after Neville and Hannah, a hidden dragon and a phoenix. After parting ways with Ginny and the others, Ron walked out of the castle and stood at the foot of the steps, gazing at the beautiful scenery of Hogwarts after the winter snow. In the morning light, from the castle gate to the Quidditch pitch, the Black Lake, and then to the snow-capped mountain ridges in the distance, it resembled a vast, boundless sea of snow. Ron admired it for a while when someone suddenly patted his shoulder. The boy turned around and saw a familiar face looking at him with a smile. Sherry was wearing a blue robe, her long, thin ponytail tied with a silver hair tie. Simple, extremely plain, but even so, she was still incredibly beautiful. The girl tiptoed, gently brushing the snow off Ralph's head and shoulders, and smiled. "Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas." Ralph saw the girl warming her hands and asked, "Are you cold?" "Not bad." Sherry slightly pulled open her collar, revealing a snow-white fleece sweater. She said softly, "I'm still quite warm." The unicorn fur sweater Ralph had given the girl last year was originally a bit too big, but as Sherry had grown, it fit perfectly this year. "Where's Hermione?" Ralph tilted his head, looking towards the castle. "I haven't seen her either." "She should still be in the Gryffindor common room." "Then let's go find the carriage," Ralph said, turning his gaze away. The girl with the ponytail gave a light and stepped over several steps, her foot slipping on the snow. She almost fell. Fortunately, Ralph reached out in time and caught her slender waist. Ralph released her hand and asked, "Are you alright?" Sherry shook her head, her face flushed. The two walked side by side on the snow-covered road, each step making a crunching sound as they left two clear rows of footprints, one large and one small, from the castle to the stables. In the stable stood a group of emaciated magical creatures, their wings like bats, their black fur clinging tightly to their skeletons, gnawing at a large cow bone. Seeing them approach, all the Thestrals raised their heads, staring with their pupil-less white eyes. Shirley couldn't see the Thestrals, only hearing Ralph describe their appearance. "Let's ride one." Ralph chose a Thestral, attached a carriage to it, and the two rode back to the castle. It was Christmas Day, and they planned to visit Professor McGonagall's house later. Yes, Professor McGonagall's house, not her office. Although Professor McGonagall spent most of her time at Hogwarts, she actually owned a small house in Hogsmeade. Last year, Sherry, who stayed at Hogwarts, spent Christmas with Professor McGonagall, and this year was no exception. The carriage, its bells jingling, raced towards the castle, slowing down along the long, sloping driveway before finally stopping in front of it. Hermione was already there, waiting for them at the castle gate. When Ralph alighted, he was momentarily stunned by the girl's appearance. Hermione was completely different. She wore a brand new robe and carried a small handbag instead of her usual heavy satchel. Her once messy hair now fell smoothly over her shoulders, and her entire demeanor had changed dramatically. Seeing Ralph and Sherry, Hermione said somewhat awkwardly, "Sorry I'm late. This hair is so hard to manage, it took me ages." "I'm never doing it again," Ralph scrutinized Hermione. If it weren't for her familiar large, white teeth, he almost wouldn't have recognized the little girl. Seeing Ralph and Sherry staring at her, Hermione scratched her head, a little embarrassed, and said, "Do I look strange dressed like this?" "Not at all." Sherry took Hermione's hand and said softly, "You look beautiful." Ralph couldn't help but smile and sincerely praised her. "You look great." Hermione breathed a sigh of relief and playfully stuck out her tongue. "Let's go." Ralph looked away, opened the carriage door, and Sherry bent down to sit in the carriage, followed closely by Hermione. The Thestrals galloped across the snow, their hooves making a crisp, rhythmic sound. The carriage quickly left Hogwarts and headed towards Hogsmeade. Inside the carriage, a magical flame was lit for warmth, so it wasn't too cold. The two girls huddled together, chattering softly, planning which sites they would visit that day. "We're going to visit Professor McGonagall first, then Zonko's joke shop, and I heard the Screaming Shack is worth a visit too." Ralph didn't interrupt, but sat quietly in the carriage reading. He slowly turned the pages of his book, reading with utmost concentration, the flickering firelight illuminating his handsome face. Then, he heard the two girls discussing gifts for Professor McGonagall. Sherry had prepared a shawl she had knitted herself, while Hermione's knitting was rather inadequate, so she gave him a set of books. Seeing Ralph empty-handed, Sherry asked, "Ralph, where's your gift?" "I had it delivered by Al last night," Ralph explained. "It's a large item, and it's not convenient to bring it alone." "What did you give him?" Hermione asked curiously. "Something very practical. Professor McGonagall will definitely need it." Ralph looked up, somewhat proudly. "A cat tree." Hogsmeade Village, the only pure wizarding village in England, was founded by the medieval wizard Woodcroft's Hungers. Hogsmeade is almost as old as Hogwarts, and the two are interdependent. As Christmas approached, the village was decorated, with holly wreaths hanging from all the shops and enchanted bonfires lit. In the northwest corner of the village, away from the hustle and bustle, stood a white house with two trees planted in front, one a jujube tree, and the other also a jujube tree. Just then, a tabby cat jumped out of the window, walked around in the snow a few times, felt her feet were cold, shook her paws, and quickly scurried back into the warmth of her room. It was still more comfortable nestled by the fireplace, reading the latest Quidditch magazine. She could lie there all day. Just then, bells rang, and a carriage stopped at the door. A boy and two girls stepped out. The tabby cat quickly transformed back into Professor McGonagall, opened the door, and stepped out of the room. "Professor McGonagall, Merry Christmas." Sherry and Hermione each offered their blessings and Christmas gifts. Professor McGonagall smiled warmly at the two girls, her two favorite students. Professor McGonagall was particularly surprised when she saw Hermione. She almost didn't recognize the beautiful young girl. Luckily, her prominent front teeth reminded her. When Ralph greeted her, Professor McGonagall's smile vanished, replaced by a stern expression. "Mr. Scamander, I found a cat tree while rummaging through the gifts this morning." "Did you write the wrong address?" "No, it's for you," Ralph said softly. "Don't you like cedar wood? Or do you dislike the catnip on it?" "Ralph, please be realistic," Professor McGonagall said with a forced laugh. "My animagus may be a cat, but I'm not a real cat. Don't send me any more strange gifts. Otherwise, I can't guarantee you won't get expelled like your grandfather Newt." Professor McGonagall pursed her lips, a sudden look of anticipation on her face, like when she played Stone Slab. She smiled and said, "By the way, I can use transfiguration to turn you into a cat and let you play on the cat tree all day. Would you like to try?" "Then let's return the cat tree," Ralph sighed. "I'll get you a different gift. By the way, where's the cat tree? Since you don't like it and don't need it, it probably hasn't been assembled yet, right?" Professor McGonagall, thanks to and for their generous donations. Chapter 2 will be posted a little later, around 2 p.m. The pacing has been a bit off these past few days. I'll try my best to adjust. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190 Luofu, Can the Dead Be Resurrected? Professor McGonagall claimed she didn't like cat trees, but when Ralph entered the living room, he found the cedar cat tree already firmly standing beside the fireplace. To reinforce it, she had even screwed it tightly to the wall, making it impossible to disassemble and return to the manufacturer. On the cat tree, there was a Quidditch magazine and some cat hair. Who knows who dropped it? Ralph dared not speak or ask. After all, the vice principal's threat of expulsion was still quite intimidating. The entire living room was furnished much like Professor McGonagall's office, and Ralph even saw a small blackboard in the corner, covered in writing. Shirley whispered to him that it was the fifth-year Transfiguration curriculum. Since he was visiting a left-behind elderly person, he should naturally help with cleaning. Ralph had been to nursing homes in his previous life, so he knew the procedure. But Professor McGonagall had cleaned the room very well, and there was nothing he needed to help with. Fortunately, there was still a thick layer of snow in the yard, so Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione began a thorough cleanup. The three of them even built a long row of snowmen in the yard, then asked Professor McGonagall for her opinion. Professor McGonagall, as the judge, biasedly named Ralph's snowman the ugliest snowman. As punishment, he had to perform a talent show. Ralph took out a whistle Sherry had given him and played Kill the Hogwarts Man, but the tune was completely off-key, almost sending Professor McGonagall to her death. Sherry and Hermione laughed uproariously. Professor McGonagall then used magic to turn all the snowmen into chess pieces and started playing wizard chess in the yard. Ralph, a master of wizard chess, confidently wanted to teach Professor McGonagall a lesson and show her his true colors, but unfortunately, he was defeated instead. Sherry quickly stepped in and continued playing chess with Professor McGonagall. Ralph, a terrible chess player, kept offering advice to the girl while watching, constantly shouting "Place it here. Place it here." He had absolutely no sense of propriety in observing a game. His sportsmanship was appalling. Therefore, the boy was quickly disliked by Sherry and Hermione, and he had no choice but to abandon his evil ways and turn to help Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall didn't mind. Despite a burden, she always managed to turn the tide with her own brilliant moves after Ralph made a bad one. The two sides traded blows, evenly matched, preventing the game from becoming one-sided. Around noon, Professor McGonagall showed no intention of cooking, nor did she plan to return to Hogwarts. Instead, she led the group away from home, heading towards a corner of the village. Ralph had assumed Professor McGonagall was going to take them out to eat, at least a cheap restaurant, if not a fancy one. Unexpectedly, they ended up at a rundown pub. At the bar's entrance, a dilapidated wooden sign hung from a rusty wall, depicting a severed boar's head, blood seeping through the white cloth wrapped around it. The Boar's Head Bar. During Christmas, while other shops were open, this bar remained locked, its old closed sign blatantly displayed. Professor McGonagall raised her hand to knock, but then, as if remembering something, stepped back, gesturing for Ralph to knock instead. The young man had a bad feeling, but still steeled himself and knocked on the locked door. Sure enough, a furious shout quickly came from inside. "Look at the sign, you idiot! Closed today. Get out of here." Ralph smirked, looking at Professor McGonagall with a hint of grievance in his eyes. It wasn't right to put a student in such a difficult position. "It's all right, keep knocking, Ralph," Professor McGonagall gently comforted him. So it wasn't you who got yelled at?" Rove relentlessly knocked on the door, knocking more than a dozen times, each time accompanied by a chorus of angry curses from inside the bar. Finally, the door was flung open, and an old man emerged, his face incredibly gloomy. He roared at Rove, "You damn idiot! Are you out of your mind, or deaf? Can't you understand human language? You just keep banging and banging. My brain's about to explode." The old man was very tall, with metallic gray hair and a beard. He wore glasses, and behind the dirty lenses were a pair of blue eyes. Rove, sprayed with spittle, quickly backed away, hiding behind Professor McGonagall. Upon seeing McGonagall, the old man suddenly calmed down, ceasing his tirade. "Oh, sorry, Minerva, I just called you idiots. It's all right, I accept your apology on behalf of Ralph, Aberforth," Professor McGonagall said cheerfully. "I've come to see Professor Dumbledore, he's invited us to lunch here." Aberforth turned and walked into the pub, muttering angrily, seemingly complaining that serving one brother wasn't enough, now there were several more. Professor McGonagall entered the pub first, followed closely by Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione. Like the leaky cauldron, the hogshead was dark and filthy, filled with a strong muddy smell. Thick grime piled up on the windows, barely letting in any light, and a few candle stubs burned on the rough wooden tables. Ralph was somewhat lost in thought. Would Professor McGonagall be so heartless as to make them clean this place? "Who's this guy?" Hermione asked in a low voice. "He looks intimidating. His name is Aberforth Dumbledore," Ralph said in a low voice. "He's the owner of the Hogshead, Dumbledore." Sherry noticed the surname and was slightly surprised. "Then what's his relationship with the headmaster?" "That's right, the stupid headmaster you're talking about is my older brother." Aberforth suddenly turned his head, stared at the three whispering children, and sneered, "Although I'd rather not admit to this unsavory relationship, Aberforth is indeed my brother." Sherry and Hermione stared at Aberforth in shock. It was the first time they had heard that the headmaster had a younger brother. "Has Professor Dumbledore arrived?" Professor McGonagall asked. "He's upstairs," Aberforth said rudely, then picked up a rag and started wiping the bar. But the rag was dirtier than the floor, and the once clean bar became even dirtier with each wipe. Professor McGonagall nodded slightly, but instead of going upstairs, she looked at the boy and whispered, "Rolf, the headmaster is waiting for you upstairs." Rolf raised an eyebrow and went up the stairs alone, entering a dilapidated living room. The living room had a worn carpet and a small fireplace, above which hung a large portrait. Before the portrait stood an old man, his back to the boy, who said softly, "Rolf, I think you've already seen my brother." "Yes," Rolf replied, walking towards Dumbledore. At that moment, Dumbledore seemed to recall some old memory, a touch of sadness in his voice. He murmured, "This is my sister, Ariana. She died at only 14, still a girl with a childlike heart." Rolf stood beside the old man, gazing at the portrait, which depicted a very young blonde girl. "She was actually much prettier in person than in the painting," Dumbledore said after a moment of silence. His gaze remained fixed on Ariana's face, unwilling to look away, as if he could bring her back to life. "Rolf," after a long silence, the old man suddenly said softly, "Do you think the dead can come back to life?" Chapter 191 Death and the Three Brothers. The grief of losing a loved one is incurable. No power, not time, strength, nor gentleness, can heal this sorrow. Therefore, many seek ways to resurrect the dead. But when death arrives, consciousness sinks into endless darkness, breath, heartbeat, and pulse cease, and limbs grow cold. Can the departed body and soul truly be resurrected? Voldemort couldn't. His answer was to create Horcruxes to ensure his own immortality, not to rise from the underworld after death. Dumbledore couldn't either, otherwise, he wouldn't have stood before Ariana's portrait, mourning his sister. But if no one could do it, that would be one thing, but Cassandra Trelawney left a prophecy predicting Helena's resurrection. And Helena believed Ralph was the one who resurrected her. Dumbledore believed in prophecies, just like Cassandra's great-granddaughter, Sybil Trelawney, who made the prophecy about a boy and Voldemort. No normal person would believe Sybil, who seemed like a con artist, let alone that a newborn boy could defeat the Dark Lord. But Dumbledore believed it. Similarly, Dumbledore believed Cassandra's prophecy, firmly believing that Ralph could resurrect Helena, even though he was only 12 years old, still a boy. If Ralph had the power to resurrect Helena, perhaps he could also resurrect his sister Ariana. Everyone has their own set of principles, and Dumbledore was no exception. Ralph looked at the hunched old man without speaking. His relationship with Helena was just a fling, a charlatan charade. The condition of marrying him after her resurrection held no appeal for him. But he truly wanted to help Dumbledore resurrect his sister, but he simply didn't have the ability. After a long silence, the boy said softly, "Professor, I don't know if people can be resurrected after death. If I can in the future, I will definitely help you. However, Helena once told me that after she died, she appeared in a place called the Mystic Realm, where the spirits of the dead might reside. Could you try investigating the Mystic Realm? It's the gap between life and death," Dumbledore said. "You know about it too." "Not only do I know about it," Dumbledore said calmly, "I've even been there." "You've been to the Mystic Realm?" Ralph was full of surprise. The headmaster's activities were too extensive. He was truly Albus Dumbledore. However, Ralph thought about it. In the original timeline, Harry entered the Mystic Realm and then returned, so it seemed that it wasn't solely for the dead. "In fact, I'm not the only one who has been to the Mystic Realm. Many people have been there, and they left behind many records." Dumbledore waved his wand, conjuring 2 chairs. He slowly sat down, gesturing for Ralph to sit as well. Gilgamesh of Sumer, wanting to see his deceased friend Enkidu, traveled to the land of illusions. Dumbledore waved his wand, producing a clay copy of the Epic of Gilgamesh, seemingly a recently unearthed artifact. I think Professor Binns mentioned this book in class, didn't he? That was the topic of the first lesson in the first year. Ralph nodded. And Jesus, according to the records, he rose from the dead on the morning of the 7th day, first appearing to Mary Magdalene, then telling his followers the story of God's kingdom. Actually, that's also a story of the land of illusions. Dumbledore raised his hand again, pulling a large parchment-bound book from thin air, the 1st century Gospel of Matthew. Of course. For wizards, the most widely known story is that of the Peveril brothers encountering death. The place where the 3 brothers were is actually the land of illusions. A copy of the Beethoven's book appeared in Dumbledore's hand. Ralph, you've read this story, haven't you? I have. Ralph nodded slightly, then asked astutely, but why didn't Helena see death in the mystic realm? I didn't see death either. In fact, only a few people do. Dumbledore shook his head, quite regretfully. I walked to the river that blocked the 3 brothers, saw the elderberry tree on the bank, and even crossed the river, but death didn't appear to stop me. Isn't the scene of the mystic realm different for everyone? Ralph frowned. Helena saw Hogwarts. How could you see the same illusion as the 3 brothers? It's different, Ralph, but there's a certain probability that they're the same. Dumbledore seemed pleased with the boy's keen observation. He smiled. All the buildings in the mystic realm are projections of the memories of those who enter. It must truly exist in reality and have a profound impact on those who enter, just like you and Miss Swinton both entered the mystic realm. If the buildings you both constructed were Hogwarts, then they would be exactly the same. Dumbledore touched the tips of his 10 long, slender fingers together and slowly said, have you heard of Godric's Hollow, a valley named after Godric Gryffindor? My grandfather told me it was a mixed community of wizards and muggles. That's right, the valley's history is far older than Hogwarts. Dumbledore nodded. The 3 Peveril brothers grew up in Godric's Hollow, though it wasn't called Godric's Hollow back then. Even the youngest, Ignatus Peveril, was buried there after he died, and his tombstone is still there. I grew up there too. The dreamlike visions you saw were in Godric's Hollow. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Yes, that river isn't far from the valley. When Aberforth was a child, he was herding sheep by the river and almost drowned, the old man said somberly. Anyway, I searched for a long time in the mystic realm but didn't see death. It seems that perhaps not everyone can see him, or perhaps that guy left the mystic realm. Professor, is there really a death? Ralph asked. I don't know, but I tend to think no, Dumbledore said softly. To be honest, that person might just be a wizard who can travel through other people's mystic realms, but we can't draw any conclusions. We can only speculate. He might have taught the 3 brothers how to create powerful magical items, like the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak in the story. Ralph didn't speak. He rubbed his temples, slowly digesting Dumbledore's words. Death? Mystic realm, the 3 brothers. Surely, to resurrect Helena, he couldn't have sent him deep into the mystic realm to find the so-called death. Thanks to the generous donor, just love wandering in the water for the donation. Chapter 192 Magic and Ruthless Work. Ralph and Dumbledore discussed death and the 3 brothers at length, but towards the end of the conversation, he suddenly remembered something else. Professor Dumbledore, that night in the bathroom, I found Mrs. Pants attacked, and I also saw that black-robed wizard collecting this. Ralph pulled a bottle from his pocket, containing a black substance, and gently shook it. The man was in a hurry to escape, and the bottle fell. What is this? Dumbledore took the bottle, glanced at it, and said softly, Fear. Fear isn't an abstract concept, but a real and powerful force, just like love. Dumbledore sighed softly. Why would someone collect this kind of thing? Perhaps creating some kind of non-existent life form? Dumbledore was about to explain in detail when hurried footsteps came from the stairs. He whispered, Ralph, come to my office tonight. Ralph grunted in acknowledgement. He looked up and saw Aberforth striding towards him, shouting gruffly, Sorry to interrupt your secret conversation about saving the world. It's time to eat, everyone's been waiting. Sorry, let's eat first. Dumbledore stood up, smiling as he walked downstairs. Aberforth snorted and dragged a large table to the center of the living room. He yelled, You 2 little devils, hurry up and bring the food up. Soon, Sherry and Hermione came running down the stairs with plates of food, but the 2 girls didn't immediately put their bowls and spoons on the table. This table is filthy too. Hermione frowned slightly. How long has it been since it was cleaned? Aberforth cleared his throat. It wasn't last Christmas, it was the year before. I can't really remember. It's alright, I brought a cloth. Sherry had anticipated this situation. After all, the kitchen downstairs was filthy, so the living room couldn't be expected to be any cleaner. Hold this for me. The girl with the ponytail turned and placed the dishes in Ralph's hands, then took out a towel that had been washed more than a dozen times and wiped the table again. A little dirt won't hurt, Aberforth muttered. It's more like illness enters through the mouth, Sherry corrected earnestly, wiping the table again and again. One wipe isn't enough. Seeing how clean the girl was and how efficiently she worked, Aberforth casually remarked, "Why don't you come work at my bar? Wipe the tables, sweep the floor. I'll pay you." "Excuse me, Mr. Dumbledore." Shirley glanced at Ralph and smiled. "I already have a job." "That's right." Ralph, holding his plate, deliberately put on a stern face. "Mr. Dumbledore, poaching my assistant in front of me, the boss, isn't a good habit." "How old are you to have an assistant?" Aberforth scoffed. "But your grandfather had an assistant named Bondi back in the day. You're really following in his footsteps." "Just a family tradition," Ralph said calmly. Aberforth glanced downstairs, then suddenly lowered his voice. "By the way, little one, what were my brother and you talking about just now? Something about schoolwork?" Ralph rambled on. "You can ask Professor Dumbledore for details. I don't care what you're talking about," Aberforth said coldly. "But I know my brother. He's good at using his words to deceive people into willingly doing things for him, especially those close to him." The old man's gaze fell on the portrait of the young girl on the mantelpiece, his expression complex. "Your grandfather Newt was like that. When he was young. My brother tricked him into going to New York and Bhutan, doing many dangerous things," Aberforth scoffed. "My brother's starting to get close to you now. You'd better stay away from him, lest he sell you out and you end up counting his galleons for him." Hermione, somewhat indignant at Aberforth's slander, retorted, "Professor Dumbledore is the greatest headmaster of Hogwarts. What he does must be glorious and noble, not as sordid as you make it out to be." "Noble my foot. Glorious my foot. Don't be silly, child," Aberforth said sternly. "What do you know? My brother learned to keep secrets and lie on my mother's lap. Don't believe anything he says, and don't do anything for him. The safest thing to do is to stay away from him as much as possible." The old man wanted to continue persuading him, but footsteps sounded at the top of the stairs, and Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall walked over together. He quickly shut up. After wiping the table, all the food was served, and the four of them sat down. Aberforth's cooking was strange. It looked dark and unappetizing, like some kind of Indian dark cuisine, but surprisingly, it tasted alright. "This fried fish tastes better with vinegar." Aberforth took a large bottle of vinegar from the table. Seeing that Sherry and Hermione wanted to pour it into their bowls, Ralph quickly gave them a wink. "What's wrong, Scamander boy? You think my cooking isn't good?" Aberforth glared. "No, I'm just worried about this vinegar," Ralph said softly. "Is there any special additive?" "What additive?" Aberforth said sternly. "This is all high quality, premium vinegar that I bought at a high price." "Really?" Ralph raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Then I heard the prefect said that the vinegar in your shop is from the wooden barrels in our house's common room. The students collect it and sell it to you at a low price. You can drink vinegar however you want, but you can't say whatever you want," Aberforth quickly said. "Don't slander me." But everyone at the table dared not eat vinegar, fearing it might be magic or something terrible. "Come on, have some wine." Aberforth changed the subject, picking up a large jar of mead and pouring a glass for Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione. Professor McGonagall objected. "Children shouldn't drink. It's Christmas holiday," Aberforth scoffed. "Besides, I stole alcohol in my second year and got away with it." "That's you, which is why you didn't graduate from Hogwarts." Professor McGonagall's eyes hardened, and she pursed her lips. "But don't corrupt my three best students. Do you know which house buys the most spirits from me?" Aberforth chuckled. "It's you Gryffindors, the Weasley twins. Last time they even bought some hot fire whiskey." Professor McGonagall glared at Aberforth fiercely. She knew it. During the celebration in the common room after beating the Slytherin Quidditch team, there was alcohol. Professor McGonagall and Aberforth were arguing, while Dumbledore tried to mediate, but ended up pleasing neither side, looking like a wronged wife. The three little ones ignored them. Ralph raised his glass, and Sherry and Hermione followed suit. The three glasses clinked lightly together, and they laughed cheerfully. Cheers! Chapter 193 Sherry and Hermione's Alcoholism. Years later, as Christmas approached, Ralph would still recall that distant noon when Professor McGonagall took him, Sherry, and Hermione to the Hog's Head. It was a strange yet amusing Christmas lunch. There was no lavish feast, the food seemed like culinary disaster, and even the environment was filthy and chaotic, but everyone enjoyed themselves immensely. Dumbledore would occasionally crack a corny joke, while Aberforth seemed to be constantly sabotaging his brother. Professor McGonagall would recount anecdotes from her youth and vehemently criticize the Slytherin Quidditch team's violent fouls, which had broken several of her ribs and prevented her from winning the final Quidditch championship. She went on and on for a full minute. Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions. Ariana's portrait hung on the wall, the blonde girl smiling at everyone. The lunch lasted for over 2 hours before finally ending. They had planned to visit Professor McGonagall and then explore Hogsmeade, but this plan had to be cancelled at the last minute because both girls were drunk. Ralph, Hermione, and Sherry had secretly drunk most of a bottle of mead, and Sherry and Hermione, having never tasted such a strong drink before, had clearly overestimated their tolerance. They even mixed the mead with beer, which made them drunk even faster. Sherry, her cheeks flushed, clung to Ralph's arm, biting her lip, saying she'd forgotten to feed the Niffler and begging the boy not to dock her pay. Ralph had just reassured her that he wouldn't, when the girl started yelling that she wanted to quit, saying she'd earned so many galleons and wanted to hire him as her assistant. Ralph was both amused and exasperated, agreeing to consider it. The girl with the ponytail then nestled her head against the boy's arm and drifted off to sleep. Hermione was even more outrageous. Drunk, she cried and begged Professor McGonagall not to give her a 0 on her Transfiguration final exam, leaving Professor McGonagall completely bewildered. The girl sang, danced, and howled, even challenging Ralph to a bet on who could drink more, with a loser becoming the winner's horse. It was a pity there was no camera, otherwise Ralph would have taken pictures of the two girls acting drunk, lest they deny it when they woke up. Finally, Professor McGonagall took the two drunken girls home. They would be staying at her place that night. Before leaving, Professor McGonagall warned Ralph to behave himself, saying that her two favorite students were usually diligent students, strictly following school rules, good girls like obedient daughters, practically a carbon copy of her younger self. Just because they were friends with Ralph, they both started drinking. It was all his fault. Watching the three of them leave, Ralph couldn't help but shrug and protest. Professor Dumbledore, you know me. I really am a good student. Dumbledore was silent for a moment, patted the boy's shoulder, and smiled. Hard to say. Sherry and Hermione stayed at Professor McGonagall's house. Ralph, not wanting to receive Professor McGonagall's Christmas holiday re-education, took a carriage and returned to Hogwarts alone. Just as he was about to return to the Hufflepuff common room, he ran into Harry, the twin brothers, Ginny, and others. Ron was there too. Although Snape had shoved his head into the cauldron, it wasn't a serious injury, and he was almost fully recovered. Upon seeing Ron, they invited him to a Quidditch match. The 6 of them could play a 3v3 snowball fight, the ultimate entertainment mode without the golden snitch and the goalie. The twins had also stolen the quaffle and the blink from Mrs. Hooch's office. The twins, the golden duo, were separated, and Ron teamed up with George and Ginny. But George and Fred looked exactly alike, and even though they wore different colored clothes, they often passed the ball wrong, resulting in own goals. Surprisingly, Ginny, despite being only a first-year student, was very skilled. She repeatedly succeeded against Ron in one-on-one matches and even drew several fouls. That's how the Weasley kids are, either academically excellent or athletically gifted, except Ron, of course. Ron's grades weren't good, and his Quidditch skills were mediocre, even worse than Ginny's. After being repeatedly intercepted by Ginny, he became frustrated and his mentality soured. Actually, Ron's ball skills weren't that bad, but that was only when he was alone. He could only unleash his full potential then. With others around, he easily became nervous, then his game would falter and he'd give off a completely defeated impression. The 6 of them played wildly all afternoon, only ending their game and heading towards the castle when it was almost time for dinner. Ron, covered in sweat, went back to his dormitory, showered, changed into clean clothes, and then left the common room for the Great Hall for the dinner. He had barely reached the Great Hall when he saw Malfoy with his 2 henchmen, causing trouble for Harry and Ron. One could only say that for Malfoy, eating, sleeping, and messing with Harry every day was already a great career he could dedicate his life to. However, Malfoy's focus tonight was on Ron. Waving a copy of the Daily Prophet, he sneered, "Weasley, the Ministry of Magic's punishment just came out. Your father was fined 50 galleons for driving a flying car." Harry and Ron both looked very uncomfortable. 50 galleons? Can your family afford that? Are your parents begging for food out there right now? Is that why you're not going back to your pigsty home for Christmas? Before Malfoy could finish speaking, Harry and Ron rushed over, punching him hard across the face with both fists. Malfoy fell to the ground, his back slamming heavily against the earth. After a few tumbling motions, he screamed in pain. Goyle and Crabbe immediately joined the fray, and the scene became chaotic. Ron walked over, bent down, and picked up a newspaper. It read, "Arthur Weasley, head of the Department for Investigating the Misuse of Muggle Objects at the Ministry of Magic, has been fined 50 galleons today for enchanting a Muggle car. The enchanted flying car was wrecked at Hogwarts earlier this year, and Mr. Lucius Malfoy, a school board member, recently demanded Mr. Weasley's resignation in an interview. Arthur Weasley has undoubtedly damaged the Ministry of Magic's reputation," Malfoy told my reporter. "He's clearly unfit to continue in that position, nor is he fit to draft laws for us, including his ridiculous Muggle Protection Act. If Arthur doesn't have the money to pay the 50 galleons, I can help, but Arthur, you have to come to my manor and weed for me. I'll provide food and lodging." Ralph raised an eyebrow. If Draco's lifelong career was Harry, then Lucius's lifelong vision was probably Arthur Weasley. Chapter 194 The Power Beyond Life. Being fined 50 galleons was undoubtedly a further blow to the already impoverished Weasley family. But upon closer inspection, it wasn't actually that serious. Bill and Charlie were both adults and working, their jobs were demanding and well paid, and their workplaces were far from populated areas, so their expenses weren't high. The 50 galleons fine was only half a month's salary for them, easily payable. However, the Weasley family still seemed poor for a simple reason: they spent everything they earned, with no savings. When unexpected situations arose, they naturally struggled financially. Like in the original timeline, when Arthur Weasley won a 700 galleon lottery, his savings were pitifully small, his youngest son couldn't even afford a new wand, and his daughter was still using second-hand books. A normal family suddenly receiving such a large sum of money wouldn't necessarily hoard it, but at least wouldn't squander it recklessly. But the Weasley family went on a trip to Egypt and quickly spent most of it in one summer, then returned to a state of constant financial hardship. The predicament was truly more a consequence of their own actions. The brawl between Malfoy and Harry didn't last long. Snape walked in from outside the Great Hall, waving his wand and quickly separating the group. "Fighting," Snape grinned. "Very good, Potter. I'll see how many points I deduct. Professor McGonagall will like this Christmas present when she returns." Malfoy started it. "He insulted Ron's family," Harry roared. "I saw you two beating up Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe." "They were just defending themselves. Gryffindor loses 50 points, Snape said in a hoarse voice. "And you, Scamander?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Professor Snape, I didn't participate in the fight." "You didn't fight, but as a classmate, you didn't stop the conflict, nor did you report it to the professor," Snape sneered. "Hufflepuff loses 10 points, Ralph thought to himself. If he had helped, Snape might have accused him of participating in the fight. Regardless of the facts, there was always an excuse to deduct points. However, Snape suddenly changed the subject. "If you can give me a vial of basilisk venom, I won't lose any points." Ron and Snape haggled for a while, finally exchanging a small vial of venom for 20 points. Both felt they hadn't lost out, even feeling they'd gotten a good deal. Malfoy also felt he'd gotten a good deal, although he had been hit and his cheek was swollen. He walked away as if he'd won a great victory. After all, Snape had deducted points from Gryffindor. Victory. "I'm going to teach him a lesson," Ron said through gritted teeth, watching Malfoy's retreating figure. "One day, I'll hold his head down and teach him a lesson. Why doesn't Dumbledore expel someone like that?" "It must be Malfoy who opened the Chamber of Secrets and attacked Filch and Mrs. Pins." "How do you know?" Harry asked. "Is that even a question?" Ron cleared his throat. "Malfoy hates Muggles, calling them mudbloods. Their family has been Slytherins for generations. They might have had the key to the Chamber of Secrets for centuries," Harry agreed. He and Ron started brainstorming ways to prove Malfoy were Slytherin heirs. But without Hermione's help to brew Polyjuice Potion, Ron wasn't sure how to proceed. Soon, the dinner began. As it was Christmas Eve, Dumbledore didn't stay at the Hog's Head but returned to Hogwarts to dine with the students who stayed on campus. Of course, Professor Snape was there too. Ron had experienced this in his previous life at university. During the Lunar New Year, when he stayed on campus, the school leaders would come to hold a celebration. Besides making dumplings and chatting, they would give out several hundred yuan in lucky money, and occasionally even students from the city would come to get some. But since the pandemic, the number of students staying on campus had increased dramatically, and the school had cancelled the money distribution. What a pity. There weren't many students remaining at Hogwarts this year, but the dinner was still lavish: a plump, golden brown roasted chicken, mountains of roast meat and boiled potatoes, large platters of sausages, bowls of peas with butter, and gifts like wizarding firecrackers. These firecrackers were similar to blind boxes. After exploding, they would reveal different items. Ralph wasn't lucky. He got quite a few mice, which he left for Mrs. Norris as a Christmas treat. After the dinner, the boy left the Great Hall alone and headed towards the headmaster's office. He approached the gargoyle and whispered, "Merry Christmas, chilled lemonade, Merry Christmas to you, boy." The gargoyle jumped aside, revealing its entrance. Ralph walked up the spiral staircase with practiced ease to the oak door and knocked. "Come in," came Dumbledore's voice. Ralph entered and politely greeted the portraits on the wall. "Merry Christmas, headmasters." The portraits, which had been feigning sleep, opened their eyes and greeted Ralph. Phoenix even called out, "Scamander, where's your Christmas present?" "I didn't receive one either," Ralph smiled. "We're even." "Hey, how stingy?" Ralph ignored Phoenix and sat down in his chair. His gaze sharpened slightly as he noticed a bottle on the headmaster's desk containing a black substance. Dumbledore turned and walked to a cabinet. He took out a shallow stone basin and placed it on the desk. "Ralph, do you know what this is?" Dumbledore asked. Ralph read the runes inscribed on the stone basin, then translated them. "Pencil of meditation, that's right. I remember Nico only started teaching you runes during the summer holidays," Dumbledore said, somewhat surprised. "You learn very quickly." "I'm quite good with the memory, Professor," Ralph grinned, adopting a similar deceptive attitude. With a bookworm's magic, word eater, Ralph's memory had indeed improved significantly, even surpassing Hermione's. "My memory isn't so good," Dumbledore smiled. "My brain is crammed with too much stuff. I have to use the pencil of meditation frequently." Dumbledore raised his wand, inserting the tip into a silver hair near his temple. When he pulled the wand out, some silver strands seemed to be stuck to the tip. Dumbledore tossed a memory into the pencil of meditation, then held up the black bottle, saying, "Ralph, I told you earlier that this contains the power of fear. The person is creating something beyond life. Next, I will show you the entire process of how that thing is created." Chapter 195 Ariana Dumbledore. Ralph touched the pensieve, and when he opened his eyes again, he and Dumbledore had left the headmaster's office and found themselves in an unfamiliar place. It was a small garden, with lush potted plants and neatly arranged flowers and grass. In the yard, a blonde girl of about 6 or 7 years old was sitting on a swing. Dumbledore stared blankly at the girl, and Ralph glanced at her as well. Cute snot bubbles still clung to her innocent face. The little girl was nodding off on the swing. Suddenly, a sound came from afar. Ralph looked up and saw 3 boys, only 12 or 13 years old, sneaking into the small garden through a loose fence. They hid behind a potted plant, looking enviously at the swing, seemingly wanting to play as well. The blonde girl was startled awake. She opened her eyes, yawned, grabbed the ropes with both hands, and dangled in midair with her toes barely touching the ground. The swing, without needing anyone to push it, began to sway up and down on its own, the amplitude of the swaying increasing. The girl, however, was not afraid. She let out a cheerful, bell-like laugh and sang a nursery rhyme. "Sniff, sniff, follow me home, I have galleons at home." When the swing reached its highest point, the girl released the rope. The immense inertia propelled her forward, tracing an arc in the air. Instead of falling, the girl hovered mysteriously in the air for a moment before gently, like a feather, slowly drifting to the ground. The girl cheered happily. The 3 boys stared at her in shock. One of them even backed away in fear, his arm hiding a potted plant, making a sound. The girl turned around, took 5 or 6 light steps, and came to the group of unfamiliar boys. "Curious?" she asked. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" One boy swallowed hard, pointed at the swing, and stammered, "How did you do that?" "Floating in the air like that, magic," the little girl said innocently. "Don't you know how?" She placed her fair arm on a bunch of blooming bellflowers. The 5-pointed star-shaped flowers opened and closed, as if they had come alive. "Look, isn't it interesting?" The boys exchanged bewildered glances, while seeing deep terror in each other's eyes. One of them stammered, "Monster, I'm not a monster," the little girl protested. Snap. The bellflower was violently torn off, and the boy threw it to the ground, stomping on it several times. The blonde little girl, on the verge of tears, quickly knelt down and picked up the broken bellflower. It was the one her brother had transplanted. A boy crouched down as well, but instead of picking up Lysianthus flowers, he grabbed a stone from the garden, raised it high, and hurled it at the blonde girl. "Monster, I'll smash you to death, you little monster!" As the leader shouted and hurled the stone, the other two boys followed suit. The stone struck the girl's head, blood immediately seeping from her forehead. The girl cried and ran towards the house, tripping over a flower pot. The group of abusive boys didn't stop. Instead, they became even more excited. So monsters could be injured. But soon, the stones were deflected by an invisible force, landing around the girl. The three boys, their faces flushed, looked as if they'd been choked. They were speechless, their bodies floating in midair. The girl's magic had gone berserk. The boys were slammed to the ground, scrambling to squeeze through the fence and out of the yard. While the girl lay on the ground covered in blood, a faint black mist seeped from the wound on her forehead, quickly dissipating like steam in the sunlight. The scene soon changed again. Rolf looked up. It was still a small courtyard, but it was no longer the same. Now, under a large tree sat a boy, wearing a lace-collared short-sleeved shirt and with shoulder-length hair. Beside him stood a goat, perched on the trunk, diligently munching on leaves. Ariana had grown considerably. Carrying 2 small wooden boxes, she ran to the boy, smiling brightly, and said, "Aberforth, this is your birthday present." Aberforth took one box, opened it, and found a small goat doll embroidered with the goat hair. "Thank you, Ariana," Aberforth said, clearly delighted with the box. He asked curiously, "What's in the other box?" The girl bobbed her head and shoulders, smiling. "It's a gift for Albus. When you go to Hogwarts, please give it to him for me." "Why would you give it to him?" Aberforth said, somewhat displeased. "He's not even going home for summer vacation, going to some Nicholas Flamel's ridiculous funeral." "Of course you should attend other people's funerals," Ariana defended her brother. The girl sat under the big tree, holding the box, still somewhat worried. "But summer vacation is almost over. Why isn't Albus home yet? Isn't he coming back to see Ariana this year?" "It's okay, I'm home," Aberforth, seeing his sister's mood, quickly comforted her. "Doesn't Ariana love playing with me the most?" "I like Albus too," the girl giggled. "By the way, Aberforth, you're 11 years old now, and you'll be going to school soon. You won't be like your older brother and not come home for summer vacation, will you?" "Of course not. What's so great about Hogwarts?" "I don't want to go," Aberforth pouted. "I want to stay with you, unlike him who's so heartless." "No, I heard Bathilda say that all 11-year-olds have to go to school, or they'll be arrested." Ariana mustered her courage and asked, "Aberforth, will I go to Hogwarts next year too?" "I asked Mom, but she won't tell me." Silence. A long silence. The girl forced a smile and softly hummed the nursery rhyme again, but tears streamed down her face halfway through. Dumbledore watched the girl, tears welling in his eyes as well. Ralph closed his eyes, unable to bear the sight. Aberforth suddenly looked terrified as a cloud of black smoke billowed from the girl, growing thicker and thicker until it transformed into an oily substance. It spun continuously, releasing a powerful burst of energy that sent Aberforth flying. The scene changed again. This time, the girl was alone. 11-year-old Ariana, in the end, hadn't made it to Hogwarts. She climbed a tree, watching the children running in the distant village and the kites soaring high in the sky. The girl stopped singing the song, and her smile vanished completely. She stared blankly into the distance. Suddenly, a terrifying roar erupted from her mouth, and black matter began to gush forth, engulfing her. The girl hid within the black mist, gently patting her back, repeatedly murmuring, "Don't be afraid, don't be afraid, the other chapter will be a little later, probably around 2 a.m. Chapter 196. Silently. After the image disappeared, Dumbledore grasped Ralph's arm and gently pulled him back to the headmaster's office. Dumbledore sat back down behind his desk, his voice hoarse. "Ralph, did you understand?" An obscurial, Ralph whispered. That's right. Dumbledore looked at the boy with admiration, somewhat surprised by his erudition. There hadn't been an obscurial in the wizarding world for many years, yet he still knew the term. My sister Ariana is indeed an obscurial, Dumbledore nodded. After she was attacked by those boys, fear took root in her heart like a seed. She began to reject magic and refused to use it anymore. But the more she did this, the more frequent her magical outbursts became. Moreover, the old man said gravely, every time Ariana had a magical outburst, it injured those around her, my mother, my brother, and I have all been injured. Ariana is a kind child. When she awoke, the memories still lingered in her mind. She realized she had hurt us, and that made her even more distressed. Because of the Statute of Secrets, we have to restrict her freedom, Dumbledore sighed softly. Otherwise, given her condition, if the Ministry of Magic found out, she would certainly be imprisoned for life at St. Mungo's Hospital. All of this deepened Ariana's unease. The seed of fear began to take root and sprout within her, eroding her life. Dumbledore's usually bright eyes dimmed. I've always said that love is a powerful force for wizards, not something ethereal, and so is the power of fear. It lurks in the wizard's heart, devouring life, twisting the mind, and finally, within the wizard's body, giving birth to another life form, an obscurus. Dumbledore murmured, it's an extremely unstable and uncontrollable power. So, that person is creating obscurus. Ralph's eyebrows furrowed. I suspect so, but my guesses are usually pretty accurate. Dumbledore picked up the bottle on the table, shaking the black mist inside. Torturing Filch and Mrs. Pins, using an ancient magic to draw out fear, and collecting it. I can't think of any other purpose besides creating obscurus. Who do you think did it? Ralph asked, genuinely unsure who had a diary. But Dumbledore was different. His eyes and ears were everywhere at Hogwarts. Those ancient portraits were his little birds, reporting the slightest disturbance immediately. Maybe he knew? Ralph, making blind guesses without sufficient evidence is a fatal mistake and can easily lead to misjudgment, Dumbledore said, his gaze lingering on the boy. But one thing is certain, the attackers will not stop here. Ralph raised an eyebrow. Obscurations are usually conceived within a wizard's body. It's an extremely long process, Dumbledore said calmly. For someone to create an obscuration, they need to collect a large amount of fear. It will inevitably continue to attack. Having obtained the answer he wanted, Ralph quickly rose to take his leave and left the headmaster's office, leaving Dumbledore alone. The old man leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his tea, and then continued to tap the pensieve with the tip of his cane. Memories flowed like water, images slowly shifting, finally settling on a simple funeral. Young Dumbledore stood before the grave, gazing at the tombstones inscribed with his mother and Ariana's names. Aberforth, having just buried his sister, rushed over and punched Dumbledore in the nose, yelling, "It's all your fault. You killed Ariana." Many other wizards were present at the funeral, all looking bewildered and horrified. Dumbledore's nose was broken, but he didn't retaliate. He simply sat before the tombstone, staring blankly at the small inscription, "Where treasures lie, there lies the heart." In that instant, the newly adult Dumbledore felt a profound emptiness within him. Overwhelmed with emotion, tears streamed down his face. After leaving the headmaster's office, Ralph returned alone to the Hufflepuff common room. He was the only one there, sitting on the sofa, lost in thought for a long time. Tom was gathering the power of fear, preparing to create an obscurus. This was indeed unexpected for the young man. But it was understandable. The Chamber of Secrets had burned down, the basilisk was gone. What should little Tom do? He couldn't just sit idly by, he had to come up with something new. He just hadn't expected this scheme to go so far. The obscurus was undoubtedly a powerful force, and since Tom was secretly making it, Ralph wouldn't be polite, he'd definitely steal it. The next morning, Ralph went to Snape's office to deliver the basilisk venom in exchange for 20 points. To save on materials, Ralph even diluted it with most of a bottle of water. After all, it was just snake venom. Diluted venom wasn't venom, right? Snape might make a killing, but Ralph would never lose. While having breakfast in the Great Hall, Ralph ran into Sherry, who had already returned to Hogwarts from Professor McGonagall's house. "Why are you alone?" Ralph asked curiously as he walked towards the Ravenclaw table. "Where's Hermione?" "She just went back to the Gryffindor common room," the girl with the ponytail said somewhat apologetically as she ate her pastries. "I caused you trouble yesterday, you were just drunk and tugged at my sleeve." "It's no trouble at all," Ralph said with a smile. Hearing the boy helper recall the embarrassing scene from yesterday, Shirley felt a little embarrassed, her hand holding the pastry stiffening slightly. Of course, compared to Hermione's crying and jumping, Shirley's drunkenness was nothing, completely insignificant. Ralph was just waiting to see Hermione and make a good laugh at her. "You won't find her," Shirley chuckled. "Professor McGonagall already helped her recall last night. She said she's been hiding in her dormitory all Christmas break." Seeing the boy wearing a scarf, dressed as if he were about to go on a long trip, Shirley asked softly, "Ralph, are you going out later?" "Yes, I'm going to Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley." Ralph lifted the suitcase in his hand. Continue investigating the portraits of house elves left by Hufflepuff. Shirley and Hermione searched through old newspapers and confirmed that the items from the Smith house had all been sold to Borgin and Burke's. He had to go check it out. Shirley gazed at the boy's smiling face, blinked, and said, "I'm free, why don't I come with you?" Ralph thought for a moment. It wasn't the Forbidden Forest, it wasn't that dangerous, so he nodded and said, "Okay, let's go now." Shirley happily stood up, excitedly asking, "How do we get to Nocturne Alley?" "By the night bus." If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 Brother, wanna get a membership card? After the enactment of the Act of Secrecy, the complete separation of wizards and muggles caused many problems in the wizarding world. The most typical issue was transportation. Apparition was certainly convenient, but this magic was not easy to learn, and many wizards couldn't obtain certification, just like muggles couldn't pass their driving tests. Flue powder required a fireplace, but not all places had fireplaces, and not all fireplaces were connected to the Flue network. Hogwarts wasn't connected, so outsiders couldn't use Flue powder to enter the school. Therefore, a means of transportation that could transport wizards anywhere, anytime, anywhere, urgently needed to be developed. The Ministry of Magic created many vehicles, such as taxi-style flying brooms, Middle Eastern flying carpets, or baskets hanging under thestrals. All sorts of ingenious ideas emerged until the 19th century, when Minister for Magic, Dowd MacPhee, imitated Muggle buses and introduced a wizard version of the night bus, finally solving the problem. Wizards could simply raise their wands and wait for the night bus anywhere. Of course, many wizards wouldn't admit this, especially those from pure-blood families. For them to admit to imitating muggles was worse than death. Therefore, the Muggle bus must have been stolen from the wizards. One could only say, the first to steal, the second to be punished. At the entrance to Hogwarts School, Ralph and Sherry stood there, idly waiting for the bus. Just then, Hagrid appeared on the road leading to Hogsmeade, staggering along, accompanied by a tall, equally drunk man. Hagrid spotted Ralph and Sherry from afar. He waved and called out, "You two little devils, what are you doing here?" "We're waiting for the bus to Diagon Alley," Ralph replied, waving back. "Hagrid, why are you drinking so much?" "I drank at the Pig's Head this morning," Hagrid said, scratching his head sheepishly. "I ran into an old friend, so I drank a bit too much." Ralph and Sherry both looked at the tall man. Hagrid patted him on the shoulder and introduced him warmly. "His name is Robbie Coltrane, a good friend of mine from school." "Hello," Robbie greeted them, slightly tipsy. "Come on, let's go to my place and drink some more," Hagrid said, putting his arm around Robbie's shoulder. "You two little devils. I'm off." Ralph and Sherry watched Hagrid and Robbie's retreating figures and waved back, saying, "Goodbye, Hagrid." A deafening roar echoed in the distance. A bright purple triple-decker bus approached from afar, weaving through the Forbidden Forest, causing the trees to sway in the wind. It screeched to a halt at the school gate, and a thin young man in a purple uniform, with prominent ears and a face covered in acne, jumped out, saying, "The night bus is at your service. I am Stam Sampak, the ticket seller for this route. I can take passengers anywhere they want to go, except, of course, the seabed." Ralph and Shirley remained silent, staring at the bus in surprise. "What's wrong?" Sampak asked. "Didn't you call this bus?" "I did, but..." Ralph turned his head, his expression strange. "Is this bus safe?" "Of course it's safe." Sampak patted his chest, assuring them confidently, "We haven't had an accident in a week. There's a large pool of blood in front of the bus. It hasn't congealed yet. Looks like it was just hit," Ralph pointed out. Sam Park exclaimed in surprise, "Ah," and rushed forward to check. He yelled, "Ern, did you just hit something again?" The driver, Ern Plain, an elderly wizard with thick-rimmed glasses, leaned out of the window, his eyes still sleepy, and said, "It looked like a centaur, all black, yelling that we weren't allowed to go through the forbidden forest. That's centaur territory. I didn't see clearly, I was too sleepy. I probably hit him by accident." Ralph raised an eyebrow. The description sounded so much like Bane. Had he been in a car accident in the forbidden forest? "Never mind, they're just centaurs," Sam Pack muttered. "Where are you two going?" "Diagon Alley." Ralph reached into his pocket and asked, "How much?" Sam Pack stared at the two, but the boy and girl's faces were hidden in their scarves, so he couldn't see their features. He smiled and said, "It's 1 gallon and 7 siccus. Pay 1 more sicco and you'll get milk and bread. Pay 2 more siccus and you'll get cheese and fried eggs. If you get a card, you'll get a pretty good discount, right?" Ralph smiled. Yes, your tickets always have a discount." Sam Pack stared at the boy's wallet and quickly replied, "As long as you top up, then we won't get a card. Let you make a little more money. You've worked hard, I can't take advantage of you." Ralph took out the ticket money, tossed it to Sam Pack, and, with Sherry, quickly got into the car. Sam Pack was bewildered in the wind. He had prepared a whole bunch of things to say, but he hadn't said them yet. This was unpredictable. Inside the bus, various chairs were arranged, and a few wizards were scattered around. They grumbled as they got up from the floor because of the sudden stop. Someone's luggage had slipped to the other end of the carriage, spilling frog eggs, cockroaches, and custard all over the floor. A wizard was eating breakfast when milk was spilled all over him. Ralph led Shirley to the third deck of the bus, where no one was. They found a window seat. Ralph took 2 seeds from his pocket, handing one to Shirley. The girl with the ponytail took the seed curiously. Just as she was about to ask a question, the seed suddenly sprouted, and under Ralph's control, vines wrapped around her like tentacles. Shirley was taken aback. Her face flushed, and she raised her little fist, waving it around. "What do you want to do?" The seat felt. The seed in Ralph's hand also began to sprout, binding the boy to the chair. He explained, "When this car starts moving, it'll be like a roller coaster. The chair isn't fixed, it'll move around everywhere. If you don't secure the chair to your body, you'll fall. I've ridden this car before, I'm very experienced." "Okay," Shirley obediently said, letting the boy control the vines to bind her without resistance. Ralph took out 2 herbs from the box and put one in his mouth. This time, without the boy's prompting, Shirley followed suit, picking up a herb and chewing it carefully. This was one of the better things about Shirley compared to Hermione. She wasn't stubborn or argumentative, she was always very obedient. The girl asked vaguely, "What's this for, Gentiana?" Ralph smiled. "It can prevent motion sickness and nausea. Anyway, enjoy this roller coaster ride." Before the boy could finish speaking, the entire vehicle suddenly shook violently. Then, as if blown by a strong wind, it surged forward, instantly disappearing from Hogwarts. Gropey Coltrane, who played Hagrid, passed away today, joining Professor Snape in the Land of Illusions. Condolences. Thank you, Mr. Gropius Coltrane, for giving a perfect portrayal of the fluffy, warm, kind, and loyal Hagrid. Chapter 2 will be posted around 12:30. Chapter 198 Shirley, Ralph, my legs are numb. If the Hogwarts Express was a smooth, long journey, then the night bus was synonymous with a bumpy, agonizing ride. The night bus hopped from the highway onto a secluded mountain path, a series of treacherous bends, swerving left and right, occasionally plunging over hills several meters high in a soaring ride. This wasn't just a roller coaster, it was more like a drop tower. Shirley felt like a blanket spread on a table, being grabbed and shaken violently. Ralph seemed to be enjoying it. Luckily, vines held her and her chair in place, preventing her from falling, though they were strapped in a bit too tightly. Ralph and Shirley were safe thanks to their seatbelts, but the passengers on the first and second floors weren't so lucky. Their chairs lurched around, constantly bumping against the bus walls with loud thuds. Anyone watching would think they were playing an office chair race or bumper cars. Of course, it could also be a violent motorcycle. Some grumpy wizards were already kicking each other while sitting in their chairs. "Get the hell out of here." Driver Ern Pran also showed off his driving skills, glancing at the newly received daily profit as he entered the Muggle highway. The night bus squeezed through a gap of less than half a meter between 2 large trucks, then, like a noodle, slipped out again. The claim of no accidents for a week made Rove seriously doubt whether it was a lie. Fortunately, top-level torture resulted in top-level speed, and the night bus arrived at Diagon Alley in a very short time. The bus finally screeched to a halt outside a store, and all the passengers murmured a sigh of relief. As the vines slowly loosened, Rove stood up and picked up his small black leather suitcase. Shirley struggled to her feet, then sat back down. She pursed her lips and whispered to the boy, "Rolf, my legs are numb." Rolf, both amused and exasperated, helped Shirley slowly down from the car and found a chair in a nearby shop. After sitting down, Shirley rubbed her legs and bit her lip, saying, "Still laughing? It's because you tied them too tightly." Rolf quickly suppressed his smile and gently massaged the girl's calves. "I didn't know any better this time. I'll tie it looser next time." Next time?" Sherry raised her eyebrows. "I'm never riding the night bus again. Nicole's car doesn't have this problem. There's no shaking at all inside." Ralph thought for a moment and said, "Let's get one from him to use as our official vehicle at Celia's Magical Beasts shop." The girl with the ponytail smiled and teased, "Be careful not to get caught." "Don't worry." Ralph laughed too. "I'm not like Harry and Ron, those two idiots. I'm not driving an invisible flying car and getting seen by muggles." After resting, the two walked west along Diagon Alley. When they passed a fork in the road, they headed towards another alley. At the entrance of the alley hung an old wooden street sign that read Knockdown Alley. Compared to Diagon Alley, Knockdown Alley was incredibly dirty. The snow that hadn't completely melted had turned black. Both sides of the alley were lined with shops selling dark magic. The first shop sold candles whose scents, when lit, were either poisonous, could intoxicate wizards, or even had aphrodisiac effects. The second shop had a large cage swarming with enormous, poisonous spiders, which were devouring a dead wild boar. The third shop was a coffin shop, with rows of movable human skeletons displayed at the entrance. Were these items illegal? They were only bordering on criminal. Truly illegal items were hidden away and sold only to acquaintances. "What a pretty little girl!" Suddenly, an old voice rang out, and a short, ugly old witch blocked their path. Her skin was covered in bumps, and she had a pair of ugly double chins like pebbles. "You're lost, my dears? Shall I take you home?" The old witch had lost all her teeth, and a faint smell of disease emanated from her. When she spoke, the stench was strange and intense. Ralph glanced at her and said coldly, "Get lost." "Ha, this is the first time anyone has dared to speak to me like that," the old witch said in a terrifyingly deep voice. "Little boy, I'm going to cut off your tongue to eat with my wine. You shouldn't have come to Knockdown Alley." She suddenly opened her mouth, curled her long, moss-covered tongue, and spat a large glob of corrosive saliva at Ralph. This attack was insidious and cunning enough, and the distance was too close. Even an adult wizard would probably be caught off guard. Ralph, however, simply raised his hand, and the saliva returned along the same path, hitting the old woman's face. The old witch's body had obviously adapted to that saliva and wouldn't be corroded, but being spat on in the face was enough to enrage her. The old witch's ugly face contorted, and she screamed, "You brat!" She suddenly shut her mouth, her body turning ice cold, as if she had fallen into an ice cave, because the melting snow on the street, under Ralph's control, condensed into a water blade, pressed against her forehead. Just a hair's breadth away from piercing her. The magic from the water monster allowed Ralph to easily control the surrounding water. The old witch froze, a chill running through her body. She hadn't seen the boy use his wand at all. Was it a silent, wandless spell? The old woman instinctively thought that this boy wasn't a boy at all, but a powerful dark wizard transformed by Polyjuice potion. Suddenly, she gripped her wand in her right hand, swiftly raising it and unleashing a beam of red light. Ralph merely tilted his head slightly, dodging the spell. The water blade aimed straight for the old witch's brow. Unable to dodge in time, she raised her hand to block the blade, simultaneously tilting her head. The water blade pierced her entire palm, leaving a deep, bloody gash on her face. Ralph kicked out, striking the old woman in the stomach, sending her small body crashing to the ground. The snowmelt on the ground acted like shackles, instantly binding her arms and ankles, pulling her down and pinning her to the ground, unable to rise. Ralph walked over and squatted down beside the old witch. He held the water knife between two fingers, gestured towards her mouth, and whispered, "You were just about to cut off my tongue, weren't you?" The old woman's face was covered in blood. She looked at the boy looking down at her in terror, her toothless mouth trembling as she wailed, "Don't kill me, spare me." Please spare me. What are you saying? Murder is illegal. It'll land you in Azkaban. I'm not a dark wizard. Why would I kill you? Ralph gently patted the old witch's cheek with a water knife and smiled. I'm a good person. The boy's tone softened, and he smiled. By the way, I'm going to Borgenbach to buy something, and I didn't bring any galleons. Can you pay for it for me? I can temporarily forgive your offense against us and give you a chance to reform. During this special period, I'm not showing chapter comments, which is a bit sad, but you can still see them in the back end, so please post more witty remarks. I love reading them. Chapter 199 The Mirror of Love and Lust and the Vanishing Cabinet. Ralph didn't have many galleons on him. Bargain and Burke was a first-rate money pit, selling either dark magic items or magical items passed down from ancient families. Those old items easily cost several thousand galleons, and Ralph's family was of modest means. They simply didn't have that much spare money to buy such things. Well, their family was actually quite wealthy. The Scamanders, as an ancient pure-blood family, had accumulated some wealth over generations. Newt was also a best-selling author. His Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them was a global phenomenon and a required textbook in all magic schools. But what did that have to do with Ralph? He was just a 12-year-old wizard. They couldn't possibly entrust him with a key to the family vault. The annual allowance given to Ralph was enough to feed the magical creatures in the box. Anything more would be extra expenses, which he would have to find himself. Newt had encountered this situation when he was young. He always couldn't resist buying those smuggled magical creatures, but he was simply too short of money. Later, Newt deliberately let his guard down, accidentally revealing his precious magical creature to lure dark wizards into robbing him. He would then capture them and extract money to protect the creature, a process euphemistically called funding. Of course, Newt's fishing tactics not only caught dark wizards but also wives. Tina was his biggest catch. Ralph followed suit, hoping to get funding. He and Sherry, these two young wizards, had a high chance of encountering dark wizards in dangerous places like Nocturne Alley, and funding would come naturally. The old witch was either unlucky or too lucky. Ralph caught her, ready to use her like a heartless ATM. The three continued deeper into Nocturne Alley. Shirley tugged at the boy's sleeve and whispered, "Ralph, are you really going to let her go? How could we let a dark wizard like that go? Who knows how many children she's kidnapped?" Ralph lowered his voice. "Write me a letter later. When you get to Borgenbach's shop, mail it quietly at the door. To whom? A trainee or who's desperate to boost his sales." Ralph whispered an address in the girl's ear. The old witch walked in front. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw two people whispering behind her. She twisted her neck uncomfortably, sensing they were plotting something. But she didn't run away, not because she didn't want to, but because she dared not. A fire-spitting salamander perched on her shoulder, staring intently at her, ready to bite her at the slightest provocation. A chill ran down her spine, a blade formed from condensed snow. Are all young wizards this ruthless these days? The old witch cursed inwardly. They quickly arrived at the entrance of Borgenbach. Ralph stepped onto the stairs, turned, and looked down at the old witch with a broad smile. "You'd better behave yourself," he said. "It's just a little money. If you try to run away, I can't guarantee your head won't be separated from your neck. Ever heard of Nicholas who almost lost his head? I don't want to see you like him." Ralph's smile was warm, but the old witch felt no warmth, only a chill that made her too afraid to meet his gaze. She felt as if she were looking at a demon. She even thought to herself, the Dark Lord in his youth wasn't all that bad, was he? Ralph turned and pushed open the door, the old witch following closely behind. Sherry hesitated, standing in the doorway, taking out paper and pen from her purse, preparing to write a letter to the Ministry of Magic. Ralph entered Borgenbach. The room was large, filled with all sorts of magical items. A withered human hand rested on a cushion in a glass case, a stack of blood-stained playing cards, a lifeless glass eyeball. A grotesque mask stared down from the wall. Various human bones were displayed on the counter. Rusty, tooth-like instruments hung from the ceiling. Rob's gaze was suddenly drawn to a mirror, suspended from a shelf by a rope. In the mirror was a stunningly beautiful woman, draped in silk, her long hair flowing. Upon seeing Rob, she gently removed her silk, revealing a vast expanse of alluring white skin. She began to dance, her chest heaving, swaying. The Borgenbach shop had something so stimulating. Rob almost thought he'd come to the wrong place. The boy observed the mirror with pure academic intent, studying the type of dance with pure academic intent. Just then, A gust of wind blew, and the suspended mirror flipped over. It was still a portrait of a witch, but this witch was a bloody mess, her face rotten, with exposed bones in many places, and even white maggots wriggling around. What a mirror of love and lust. Ralph immediately lost interest. He pulled down the curtain to cover the mirror, preventing Shirley from seeing something so inappropriate for children when she came in. He walked to the counter, rang the bell on it, and a series of tinkling sounds filled the room. Soon, a hunched-over man appeared behind the counter, his face wrinkled, his chin covered with countless warts. He ran his hand through his greasy hair, looked at the old witch, and asked in a low voice, "Madam, what can I do for you?" The old witch didn't speak, only looked at Ralph humbly. Rove didn't immediately question the Smith family. These things couldn't be rushed, they had to be done step by step. He pointed to a cabinet in the corner and said, "Bring it here." Mr. Borgin glanced at the old witch, then at the boy, and after a moment, slowly walked over and carried the cabinet to the counter. It was a black and gold cabinet, engraved with runes, and the door had a small but exceptionally clear raven emblem. "How much is this vanishing cabinet?" Rove asked. Borgin looked at the boy, grinned, revealing his missing tooth, and laughed. "Sir, you have a good eye, recognizing it as a vanishing cabinet right away. Only 4,000 galleons. 4,000 galleons is the price of a pair of vanishing cabinets," Rove laughed. "Mr. Borgin, you only have one, its value has plummeted, even a 50% discount would be too expensive." He was right, the vanishing cabinets were truly valuable because the two cabinets were interconnected, you could enter one and emerge from the other, faster than a magic door. But with only one cabinet left, it's useless and not worth much, which is why it hasn't sold. It's like a beautiful shoe, but if there's only one left, nobody will buy it. But Borgin, of course, wouldn't admit that. He boasted, "Oh my, sir, you can't say that. Look at this raven, it's the coat of arms of the Lestrange family. This is a 16th century artifact. Look at the craftsmanship, the carvings. I guarantee you, in the entire Nocturne Alley, you won't find a vanishing cabinet with more artistic flair. It's a work of art. Well, it's unusable now, at best it's just a decoration. How about we round it down?" Ralph said softly. 400 galleons, I'll take it." "Oh, sir," Borgin said with a wry smile, "you don't round it down like that. The lowest is 3,000 galleons, no lower, 800, take it or leave it." Ralph began to haggle. 2,000 galleons, Borgin took another step back. Ralph turned to leave, counting down from 5. He'd only reached 3 when he heard Bakken hurriedly say, "All right, I'll sell at a loss, consider it a gesture of friendship." Ralph stopped, sighing. It seemed he'd been too hasty, offering too high a price. He hadn't negotiated well enough. But it didn't matter, it wasn't his money anyway, so he wouldn't feel the pinch. Thanks to the generous donors, Trooper 1770, and 233 for their generous donations. Chapter 2 will be later, possibly around 2 p.m. Chapter 200 Human Metamorphosis. After a round of haggling, Ralph bought the vanishing cabinet, allowing Borgin to tearfully make a net profit of 600 galleons. The old witch cautiously paid, though unhappy, she forced a smile, her old face pressed against Ralph's cold shoulder. Borgin sized up the two strange customers before him. The old witch seemed to have been coerced by the boy to pay. Well, this had nothing to do with him. Borgin shop was a pawn shop, an antique shop, and a dark magic shop. It had everything, selling and buying anything, as long as the price was agreed upon, cash on delivery. Just like Malfoy not long ago, who came to sell dark magic items, even if those items were being investigated by the Ministry of Magic, they still accepted them all. Similarly, they didn't care where the customer's money came from, even if it was just stolen from Gringotts, as long as it was real galleons. Ralph picked out a few more small items, not expensive, but worth 100 or 200 galleons. The atmosphere between the two became increasingly harmonious. Bakken went backstage to pour a few cups of coffee, and when he returned, he noticed another young woman had entered, but he didn't pay much attention. Shirley and Rove exchanged a glance, and then Shirley sat down beside him. "Mr. Bakken, I'm actually quite interested in the Big Four," Rove finally spoke, revealing the true purpose of his visit. "I came here today to see their magical artifacts. Do you have any here? Like a Ravenclaw tiara or a Gryffindor greatsword?" Borgin's lips twitched. If their shop had tiaras and swords, that would be incredible. The magical artifacts left by Gryffindor and Ravenclaw are too few. Once discovered, they're highly sought after and can't be kept. Bargain shook his head. We did acquire a Slytherin locket before, but it was quickly sold for a high price. What about the Hufflepuff family's items? Ralph asked softly. The Smith family are descendants of the Hufflepuff family. The famous collector Hepzibah Smith is said to have amassed a considerable collection of Hufflepuff treasures. After her death, I heard her collection was sold to Borgin Burkes. That's right, Borgin readily admitted. Our shop did indeed buy Hepzibah Smith's collection. This news was actually spread by them back then to sell Smith's belongings at high prices. The value of an item sometimes depends not on its intrinsic worth, but on the story it tells. Take Gryffindor's sword, for example, so famous, but frankly, it's just a sword forged by goblins 1,000 years ago. Goblin swords are quite numerous, but why aren't they famous? Because they can tell a story. Do you still have any of Hepzibah Smith's collection in your shop? Ralph asked. They've all been sold over the decades, leaving only a few minor items in the warehouse, Bargain said regretfully. Ralph pressed, is it registered? I'd like to see what's there. Bargain gave the boy a deep look. He didn't seem to be there to buy anything, but rather to search for Hepzibah Smith's relics. Bargain didn't pay much attention, as wizards often came by, some searching for so-called treasures, others looking for lost magical artifacts from their families. Dealing with these ancient magical families always involved various problems. Since the boy had just bought a vanishing cabinet, he didn't mind offering a small favor. For Bargain, it was just a small favor, but the customer might be very grateful. Why not do something so inexpensive and beneficial? Bieber, Bargain called out, and as soon as he finished speaking, a house elf appeared in the room. Bargain whispered a few words, and the house elf vanished in an instant, but reappeared shortly after, holding a thick booklet. It's all here, Bargain said softly. The items left behind from the Smith mansion are all recorded here. Ralph lowered his head and flipped through the booklet, his speed almost like quantum speed reading, or like a bank teller counting $100 bills. In Bargain's eyes, the boy wasn't reading, he was clearly flipping through pages. The old witch scoffed even more, thinking, what a pretentious fellow, does he really think he has a photographic memory? But to everyone's surprise, after looking through it once, Ralph flipped back to a page in the middle and whispered, excuse me, who did this portrait go to? Bargain glanced at the photograph. It depicted a house elf washing a small golden cup. Bargain's pupils suddenly contracted, and he said apologetically in a smooth voice, it's been too long, I don't remember. Ralph raised an eyebrow. In the original timeline, this shop remembered perfectly well the story of Tom Riddle's mother selling Slytherin lockets, but this registered portrait, they couldn't recall who it was sold to? Ralph wasn't in a hurry. He smiled and said, if you don't remember, that's fine. If you remember someday, be sure to tell me. I'll bring my elders back again. It seemed he'd have to have Dumbledore and Nico come to this shop specifically to help Mr. Bargain remember. After the group left, Bargain stared intently at the portrait, his expression dark and uncertain. Soon, the three reached the shop entrance. The old witch asked hesitantly, can I go now? You promised, you can go now. Ralph nodded, whistled, and the fire lizard hopped back onto the boy's head. The old witch hurriedly stepped down the stairs and fled, but just then, a young witch brushed past her, raising her wand and shouting, don't move. The old witch jumped in fright, exclaiming in astonishment, what, I'm an Auror, Tonks said, pulling out his identification. I received a report that you're suspected of assaulting a young wizard. Come with me to the Ministry of Magic. The old witch's face changed, and she looked at the smiling young wizard, angrily saying, you broke your promise. I said I'd let you go, but you got caught by the Aurors again. What does that have to do with me? Ralph spread his hands. I can't take care of you forever, can I? You two coordinated so well, and you say it has nothing to do with you. It really has nothing to do with me. I just happened to be passing by, Tonks said seriously. You look familiar. You might be mistaken, the old witch said, covering her face. Your face is so distinctive. Let me see if you're wanted. Tonks pulled out a small booklet and started flipping through it. Comparing it to the photos, she suddenly exclaimed excitedly, there really is. The bounty is 1,000 galleons, that much? Ralph said, somewhat surprised. This guy has kidnapped quite a few young wizards. Tonks punched the old witch hard in the cheek. I hate human traffickers like you the most. After chatting for a while, Tonks hurriedly left, eager to get the old witch back to the Ministry of Magic. After all, it was 1,000 galleons for Ralph, and her small achievement in getting a permanent position. She couldn't afford to lose it. Ralph and Sherry walked along the road towards Diagon Alley. The girl said softly, "Tonks seems quite interesting." "Yeah, don't let her silly appearance and clumsy actions fool you. She's a really nice person. Write to her, and she'll come right away." Ralph smiled. "By the way, did you know? Tonks is also a disguise magus." "I know," Sherry nodded calmly. "Professor McGonagall mentioned it to me a few times when she was teaching me transfiguration." Ralph looked envious and clicked his tongue. "Being able to change one's appearance at will, I wish I could do that too." Sherry looked at the boy's expression and asked with a smile, "Are you envious?" "Of course, she's a disguise magus." Ralph looked at the blue sky and said, "Aren't you envious?" Sherry's eyes were clear and bright. She shook her head and smiled. "Not really, not that envious." Ralph gently tapped her head. "Can't you pretend to agree with me for once? It makes us seem so out of sync." The girl with the ponytail smiled and turned her head away. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, "Actually, ordinary wizards can also use transfiguration to transform themselves into someone else's appearance." Ralph exclaimed in surprise. "Really, really?" Sherry explained earnestly. "Wizards who have mastered transfiguration can achieve the exact same effect as the disguise magus." "Transfiguration, what year is that?" Ralph asked curiously. "6th year," Sherry grinned. "Of course, even if you learn it, reaching the level of freely transforming into someone else is very difficult. It requires a lot of practice. Many wizards never master transfiguration in their entire lives." "6th year," Ralph sighed softly. He was only a second-year student, and she was already discussing 6th-year courses with Sherry? Was he getting arrogant, or was Sherry overestimating his transfiguration talent? Sherry didn't stop walking, suddenly turning to look at the boy with a bright smile. "Ralph, you bet with Hermione every day. Dare to bet with me?" Ralph raised his eyebrows and asked, "What are we betting on?" "If I can transform into you before summer vacation, I win." "Okay," Sherry said softly. Ralph looked into the girl's eyes, staring for a moment, then suddenly said, "Sherry, you haven't already learned transfiguration and are just trying to cheat on the bet, have you?" "No, no." Sherry smiled, her eyes crinkling into crescents. "I've only learned 5th grade material. I'm still a long way from transfiguration. I'd be a dog if I lied." That one word, only, almost made Ralph vomit blood. Sherry's eyes sparkled, and she said softly, "Bet or not, you don't only dare to bet with Hermione, do you?" "Hey, this damn competitive spirit. What's the stake?" Ralph asked. "The bet, huh?" The girl with the ponytail walked briskly, then suddenly smiled and said, "I haven't decided yet. I'll tell you after I win. This chapter is ridiculously late. I fell asleep last night. This 3,000-word-long chapter barely makes up for my regret." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.